heard earlier that there's no real concern about aluminum because it's such a small amount, and so it really shouldn't matter. But the kind of aluminum that we put into vaccines is a different kind of aluminum that we see environmentally. This is called a nanoparticle, and nanoparticles bind really tightly to the bacteria antigens, the virus antigens, the food protein antigens, and any other contaminants that are in the vaccines that we may not know about. And we know that the biochemical properties of nanoparticles is that they are capable of entering the brain. And so we have not evaluated the safety of the aluminum nanoparticle and its injection and where it goes when it gets into the body and whether it gets into the brain. Do vaccine ingredients belong in the brain? No. Do they get into the brain? No one has ever studied it. But animal studies using the same chemicals that are in vaccines that we give to children directly demonstrate that the vaccine ingredients do enter the brain. We are ignoring this information. There are scientists in Europe who've actually done studies on the aluminum nanoparticle and have shown that it can persist in the brain for years and decades. And so what we're seeing is a large outbreak of neurodevelopmental disabilities in adults, including Alzheimer's. And one of the main factors that they're finding in the brains of people with Alzheimer's is the aluminum nanoparticle that's directly related to the vaccines that we're giving. So we have never studied whether the aluminum that we're giving in vaccines gets into the brain, and we've never measured whether it stays in the brain and what it does if it does stay in the brain. But we do know that vaccines are supposed to cause inflammation in the body. But we have more than half of our children with chronic inflamed conditions. And we've never allowed ourselves to ask the question, if the vaccines cause inflammation acutely, do they continue to create inflammation chronically? We have 1 in 5 with neurodevelopmental disabilities, 1 in 10 with ADD and ADHD, 1 in 35 with autism, 1 in 11 with asthma, and 1 in 20 under the age of 5 with seizures. Autoimmune diseases are exponentially rising, and we are finding that the viruses and the bacteria that we're injecting into the body, along with the adjuvants, create something called molecular mimicry, which means the body sees those viruses thinking that it's foreign, but actually finds pieces of those viruses that match pieces of the self. And the immune system doesn't differentiate between what it's been told to reject and itself. So it will turn the immune system on itself, leading to an autoimmune condition. We know this about hepatitis B, we know it about the Gardasil vaccine, and we know it about the flu vaccine. And we continue to say unequivocally that the vaccines have been studied effectively.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Saturday, March 30th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Unfortunately, some tough topics to get into. It seems that every day, I don't know, my entire career, the topics we get into seem to be pretty dark. But nonetheless, I want to start with the same point that I've always said about this stuff. That I really, truly believe that the reason that this stuff feels so heavy right now is because we're going through a point of change. And it doesn't always mean that's going to get better, but I think it means there's an opportunity to make it better should we, as the peoples of the world collectively, want to do something about it and marshal that kind of momentum and change. And of course, today we've been over decades and decades and decades and centuries pushed into positions where we have far less effectiveness in that field and in that way, and communication, every possible angle. That's what's happening again right now. And I think that's the important thing for us to really stand back and recognize. And this is in regard to the first part of the show today, of as I framed it, the sort of digital nano cage. Visible. It's an invisible concept. That's the technocratic panopticon that the many different analogies we've used to discuss this. And so what I'm seeing here, and I think it's not a unique opinion, I think it's very easy to point out, is we're going through another one of these transitions. And my opinion is, and I've had conversations with this about Matt Ehret. He's written articles for the TLAV about this. I think we're going through, or rather historically, we go through these moments where, whether it's based on yuga cycles or some kind of differing planetary alignment, something, for whatever reason, we go through these ebbs and flows of consciousness where people start paying attention more or start seeing things deeper than they have before, or for what, just on a very benign, non-deep, super spiritual kind of mindset, just for whatever reason are seeing things more clearly than they have before. And we go through these periods in history, and power structures take advantage of them, and they either suppress that mindset or they use that and roll you into something else. And you can look through history, you can see these sort of transitions. I think today that's what we're going through again. And I don't think that's hard to recognize, that it's either because this is a transition that was decided is necessary for whatever reasons they've come to, and it's being forced in, which kind of feels like that makes the most sense, or it's because they recognized, again, for whatever reason, they saw it coming, or they just recognized we were doing it, that we were seeing more than we used to, that we were questioning things that they never thought we would. Israel, case in point. And I think right now, and again, that's obviously after this sort of transition had begun, but they're seeing that we are questioning these things. And I think we're in the position of like the end game, as if you want to look at it that way, where driving us into a position where they just won't have to worry about this problem again in regard to a digital control, in regard to suppression, censorship, digital IDs, social credit, all the stuff that we've all talked about. And what's so wild about all those things is that these are verifiable, real world, currently used concepts, and yet oddly still get deemed conspiracy theory. It's just confounding, right? And that's a lot of this stuff is today. So we're going to start today with this conversation. And as I put in the title, it is a glimpse. We've done 4-hour shows on just this topic. Today, it's just really a topic that a few things came across my virtual desk, and I just thought that I want to reiterate this point again today. And it's sort of, as I wrote, it's sort of a glimpse from all of it. Like I kind of start with the point about CBDCs. We talk about digital passport, digital IDs, and how these all connect. And, in just a 1-segment conversation. And hopefully this show won't be as long as some of the others, but I say that and it still seems to somehow end up being 3-4 hours. But I think it's important that we see how this connects, and we get into those things that are some of the current points that are really standing out, like edible vaccines. And I want to, as I always think is important, connect all of these with the concept of where I truly think the level of technology is, which I don't think most people, possibly even myself, truly understand what that level is. Nanotechnology, smart dust, these kind of things, and how all of this connects with where this seems to be going. And it's an alarming reality. I hope that I'm wrong about where it currently is, because that gives us more time at the very least. And I hope we're wrong about all of it in general, and we're missing the mark entirely. That's what I hope for. That's the crazy thing about all this, is I hope that I'm wrong. Like a lot of us say over the years, I really hope that we're wrong about this, because that would mean that we're not in the danger that we think we are. Now, we're also going to talk about I think the main points I'm going to go over today are specifically, and as you've noticed, I've been trying to keep going on kind of the connective points around things like the humanitarian aid, the ceasefire, the bigger points that I think the average people want to see, because it's just important to know where these things are. But as they relate to larger conversations like humanitarian law or international law and humanitarian aid and how they're being abused, and a specific point that I really thought was, I actually, for 1 second, thought about just focusing on this one point today, because that's how important I think it is. But it's already been discussed. I saw this circulating a few days ago, in fact, and I wanted to talk about the Arab, basically an Arab individual who had converted to Judaism, and this is a while ago, and he was just basically publicly executed. But now, as I read the title, even after we started, I'm thinking, just to be even more specific, I should have said the IDF as opposed to Israel, because then someone's going to argue that we're somehow trying to act like this was something it's not. But the bottom line was, I think right now it's become pretty common to just to discuss, which again, as I say it even now, I'm thinking I should have been more specific about it, but that these things are, Israel has killed this many people so far. We all do this in the shorthand when it comes to the larger ongoing big events like this. But to be very clear, we're talking about IDF members who basically, don't even know why I said that, who specifically and visibly executed this person with his hands in the air, because I think the narrative is that after they stopped him, asked him, "Are you Jewish?" which I think is an important point right there in and of itself, that something that we pretend isn't really going on, as Robert's written about forever, this obvious apartheid, this obvious I mean, when they tell you it's a state for the Jews alone, and Netanyahu stresses that point, and then weirdly on the world stage, we act like everyone has the same rights, something's missing there, right? And the point is, this person got shot because they were digging through his bag and they claimed that they found a knife. Now, I don't know if that's true. There's been countless examples throughout and far back as you look where they lie about those things. But the point is, the person was standing with his arms in the air, a person who has been taking good faith since the point that it happened, and he's been public about it, to try to assimilate into the idea that what Israel wants of these people, what they claim they want. And even as he was telling them he was Jewish, they asked him if he was Jewish. He kept telling, they ended up ultimately executing him right in plain day in front of everybody, because I think, I'll let you guys decide for yourself before we give my opinions in the start. But this is all a really frustrating topic and really upsetting because of how much it relates to. It gives you the insight into all the other things that we're talking about. And we will go over some of those other points as it relates to, the inhuman actions that we're seeing by some people connected to the Israeli state. And, again, the real point is not every Israeli, not every Jewish person. Really, I would, really, to be quite specific, not even every person in the Israeli government, because there are aspects of the Arab coalition that I very clearly don't agree with this. So even there, we should be as specific as possible. So on that note, and we're going to talk about a huge point around international law, by the way, Sam Husseini really doing a good job in the briefings. I want to start with a couple quick shout outs on social media. And then really first, the point about our really just overwhelmingly positive campaign in regard to Save the Last American Vagabond. The reason I wanted to point it out now to start is because we're on the 30th right now. So tomorrow is the last day of the month in order to donate for the recurring, the real point of why we did this. So on the 1st, we'll be able to see whatever the recurring amount that rolls over. And so my goal here is to continue to raise that recurring amount from month to month, so we can maintain not just our continual work and get back to having the amount of writing we were, which I'm already trying and starting. We've had a few articles so far. I think Derek is working on one as well. And also be able to continue, and I will give you guys some updates soon, maybe even on our Substack, but in regard to the lawsuits we're dealing with in the IRS. And as I said before, because of you guys and because of all the amazing support we got here just in this month, I've already been able to pay for the things we needed to keep the lawsuit going. Like, we're still deciding whether we're going to take this all the way to court. I kind of think that's what we're going to have to do. I just don't see how I can stand back and give up. I don't want to explain it all now. I will very soon once I decide whether that's going to happen or not. But it's going to cost a lot, and I don't even want to put that on you guys. But the point is, these are people that are coming after what we're doing. And so it's important to me to be able to fight that. At the very least, if we don't, this stuff is going to fall back, and I don't want that to happen. And quite frankly, as I've always said, I'm never going to stop doing this. I don't care if it's me in my room with my phone, what's going on, because all this gets taken from me. I'm still going to be doing that. And it's not even something I should be saying if it's trying to be like, I'm going to be gone, so help fund me. But I just want you to know that this matters to me. You matter to me. And I'm going to continue to fight for this in any way I can. But I would love to do it as the last American vagabond and not get that taken by some company that thinks they can just sue me into oblivion. But my point is, you guys are amazing. And the reason we're still fighting in here is because of you. And next month, we'll be talking about the recurring amount and going forward from there. So last part of the month to get in the recurring aspect if you want to see it roll over. So thank you for your support thus far. Now, on social media to start, really interesting here. A lot of people have been talking about this. I showed you one of these videos, I think it was 2 shows ago. Here's a new one that I haven't seen. Now, a lot of people rightly, and we should be very skeptical about everything these days, we're wondering whether these videos were fake. And even the one I saw, I was like, it seemed there were some anomalies, but it's very clearly real. And we already knew that whether or not these videos were fake. This is happening. FBI, authority, local county entities are going to people's homes in the United States, in the UK, a lot of places in the world, knocking on their door and saying, hey, you posted things on Facebook. Yeah, they're not breaking the law, but we just wanted to touch base with you. Really creepy and quite frankly unconstitutional. Now, technically, you could argue, since the way they're doing it, it's not technically unconstitutional. They're not arresting you. They're not doing. We're just stopping by and make sure it is a threat, in my opinion. Now, whether they see it that way or not, that's how it's perceived. These are authority figures, and why are you coming here? What did I do wrong? Nothing. Okay, but why? Then what are you doing here? Oh, okay, I see. So you feel it was borderline, which means you wonder whether we could be a criminal. That's what they're getting at. So how is that not a threatening situation, or at least an uncomfortable danger where you get the point? And that is crossing a line. We all pretend in this country that that's not how this works. I'm allowed to express my opinions. But the truth is, as we're pretending that, we're all seeing that we're getting censored. We're all seeing that the U.S. government is constantly framing free speech as a threat, as hate speech, as an anti-Semitic comment, whatever it is. And even if they are actually those things, however they arbitrarily define them that day, those things aren't violations of the law. Those are subjective, personal opinions. And as I've said before, as much as this may irritate or offend somebody, I don't care about the way you perceive my thoughts. It's my intent that matters. You don't know my intent. That's why you don't get to assume that I'm being racist and therefore say what I'm doing is against the law because you pass some arbitrary law about the symbol I held up that day or the way my face looked or the shirt that I wore. These are subjective, ridiculous, childish points. And guess what? They could actually mean what you think. Still doesn't make it a crime. But this is what they're trying to create. So they can suddenly make anything they want at any time, whatever they want it to be. That's how this works. Everything means nothing. Nothing means everything. That's been going on for a long time. So the Misfit Patriot posted this. This was today, in fact, or excuse me, yesterday. And says, on March 8th, 2 men stating that they were FBI showed up at my house to talk to me about my, quote, social media posts. I asked one of them if there was a specific post they were concerned about, and they said no. They said they reviewed my content and found nothing illegal, but insisted on speaking with me anyway. I referred them to my lawyer, who has reached out multiple times with no response. I found that really interesting, actually. To me, that far more speaks to the fact that this is not about any legal. They don't want to speak to the lawyer. They don't want any legal process on the record. They just want you to know we're watching you. We see you. We see your post that we deem to be dangerous, that we deem to be right-wing MAGA terrorism or whatever it is they're trying to say. And this is us letting you know that. How is that not ominous? And the simple idea that you can be, flagged like we know is happening, cataloged, investigated by the FBI for something that does not break the law. Again, there's lines here, but you get these people that believe that, well, there's only good people doing good things here. And so shouldn't we let them check it just to be safe? Don't you have nothing to hide? I mean, are we really still pretending those things make sense? Like in what society in the past have we not learned lessons from exactly that? You have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be worried about it, except when people aren't following the laws, they pretend that they are. When you're talking about an authoritarian fascist government that doesn't care about whether you have rights or not, those things don't matter. I know that's a shocking thing to realize. So let's watch this clip, and we'll go over some of the actual article points where this is being essentially admitted right now, which, that, again, shouldn't be that shocking. Hold on. Starting off strong, pretty sure. I mean, I know that I downloaded that. I guess I didn't. Hold on one second. So the last one, actually, this one here, the last one we just talked about was the one that I showed you was the, where they went out, where they came to the house, they walked, and they weren't identify themselves. And that was actually the reason that I thought that seemed, I was like, well, maybe an element of suspicion, right? Because if they weren't identified, but then the point was, I guess they claimed that they did. But I still think that even though, like, they pretend, well, we did it at the door. You guys tell me what you think. Let's just say you asked them at the door, then walked outside and say, I want you to identify yourself again. Don't you think that they're required to do that? Especially if you say that I just missed it and I didn't get to notify, I didn't get to see it, so on. That's what I think happened. It's a good point to remember anyway, because I think technically, especially on film, they're supposed to identify themselves, which they did not. But now I think it's clear that that was real. Okay, here's the video. They're laughing at his Matt. That's why he put it there. But yet, still stood there. Right?
Hello. Hi, I'm looking for Zach Pompilio. Hello? Yeah, speaking. Hi, my name is Cristian Highland. Yes, this is me. You there? I'm sorry, who are you? My name is Cristian Highland. I'm a special agent of the FBI. Are you home? We'd like to speak to you for a second. No, I'm not home. What is this in regards to? This
before he gives his explanation, because he basically, it's pretty bad audio anyway. So for those that might be confused, recognize, first of all, if you don't have one of these technologies, which I recommend you don't, by the way, like a Blink or something like that, or an Echo, wherever these things are, it's just not secure in any way, shape, or form. You can be spied on. You can be listened to. The point is that those things have the ability from your phone to be able to, like if you're at the store, it notifies you, hey, there's someone at your door, and you could press the button and talk through your phone out the speaker, in case people didn't know that. So whether he was home or not, the point is he could pretend he wasn't. Now, my question is, why even answer? Now, this confounds some people. I say this every time I talk about it with anybody. I do not answer my phone unless I'm expecting a call. I mean, I look, and as if somebody I want to talk to, I will. But my point is, half the time I don't even look at it unless I'm expecting a call. It's flipped over. It's on silent, which in some cases has irritated professional colleagues of mine. But the point is, I think I've always said it's about a mental health thing. I don't want to always be a slave to my phone because I get notifications every 5 seconds these days. But on top of that, the door, I never answer my door. Half the time I won't even get up and look unless I'm expecting somebody. And it's the whole FOMO thing that bothers people. Like they want to know, who was it? What were they there for? Who cares? And especially if it's a police officer, let them come back in a way that catches you outside of your house or put something in my point is, if it's someone serving you papers or police, and unless they have the authority to kick your door in, they're not going to be able to do anything right there, which hinders the process. Now that may bother some people listening, like you're somehow not doing the right thing. The right thing is for them to respect your constitutional rights and respect your personal boundaries, and ultimately not come knock on your door for something that wasn't breaking the law. But I think it's important to think about that for a second. If you wouldn't have answered at all, they would have left. Come back again later. Don't answer the door again. They would have left. Eventually, they'll probably put a note on your door, put something out there. And, even with what is it? There's a whole another example I was going to make, but the point being, I don't think it's in your interest these days to just be to feel like you have to respond there, because once you open that door, especially if there's a different circumstance going on and there's police, things can change. Suddenly they're inside your home, and now there's a very different dynamic the moment you open that door. Now, on top of that, what I think is interesting was one thing I was going to say. I just forgot it. Well, in any case, the point is, so now he comes going to explain to you what he said after the fact, which and as he even explains, you could argue that he's lying, right? He says that though, because he said the audio was so bad you can't tell. But the ultimate point is they came to his door for social media posts. So here's how he explains the aftermath, where he spoke to them. I think it was on the phone, or I'll let him explain.
That's the full recording that I have. Now, right after that video got off, I gave him my number to call me because it was very choppy. As you can see, I was repeating stuff. So I talked to Mr. Highland on the phone, and by the way, as far as I know, this is an actual FBI agent who works with the actual FBI, and this is a LinkedIn page showing that FBI agent who works in my city.
And so that was the thing. I said, really, it's the same point. Like, how do you truly know? Now, again, what he's going to say is it's pretty elaborate for somebody to make badges and whatever else. But you know what? It's really not that difficult today to buy something very reasonable. They could be home invaders. I mean, the point is that it's really difficult to know anything like that these days because of how easy it is to lie about this stuff, even if there is a page made and whatever else. So again, just another reason just to not do that at your door. There's a whole barrier there. It's a very personal boundary. Do that elsewhere. You want a meeting with me? We'll set it up and I'll meet you at the office or whatever it is. That's a good point to think about.
So, conspiracy theorists, most likely that's the FBI, okay? People don't make badges and show up to random people's houses and then record themselves talking to them, impersonating agents.
They certainly could, but I agree with them. It's unlikely. Certainly could happen.
Just side note. Now, I would never drop a recorded phone call with the FBI, even if I had one, so you're going to have to take my word for this next part. I talked to this agent on the phone. The agent said that they were at my house, and the only thing that they could tell me is it was in regards to my social media. I asked them if it was about a specific post on my social media, and the reply from the agent was, "No, we looked at your social media and found nothing illegal. We are just here to check off a box. It's procedure." To which I replied, "You need to talk to my attorney. I have told you guys, be prepared for anything, and that includes the FBI coming to your house." So, My attorney reached out to them 5 seconds after I got off the phone with them, which was 5 minutes after I talked to them. They did not answer. They have not returned my attorney's call to this date. We have no further information. I have also reached out to more than one journalist, and they have reached out, as far as I know, and have not heard back either. So the FBI is showing up to people's houses that aren't committing crimes and trying to check off boxes. Let me know what you think of that.
I think that's alarming. And what's crazy to me is that people don't think that. It doesn't matter whether you think they had good intentions. We're talking about an overstep of power here. And even in the smallest way, it is a mission creep concept. And it always happens the same way if we just look back in our history, or even before U.S. history, like the history of the human species, for crying out loud. This is what happens. And it's not all encompassing, but the reality being that the wrong people usually collect to the top of power, and eventually the powers that may have been sought or given in good intent and with good intentions, or what's the word I was looking for? Well, this with good intentions, it can be abused later by the people that later come into that power. I mean, it's the same concept all the time. Now, here, just so you can see, it's not something that's even that hidden. I mean, this is from yesterday. The FBI agent says he hassles people, quote, every day, all day long over Facebook posts. It's just an effort to keep everybody safe, he says, and keep everybody to make sure nobody has any ill will. So then why don't you just literally go around to everybody's front door and ask them, are you dangerous? Are you bad? Like, the idea that you can say you're not breaking the law, right? And so you're going to go check to make sure you're not dangerous or have any ill will. So the only thing to read from that is that you've decided that there's another secondary category of things that are technically not breaking the law, but enough for us to catalog you as a potential problem. So what's the difference, guys? Now what they're trying to do is roll back the law to be able to meet that permit. This is the same thing we showed you that Whitney and I talked about in the 2020 election special, where she said, we see the problem building, we just don't know how to stop it. What was she talking about? She was talking about dangerous right-wing terrorists that have learned how to not break the law and communicate with wink-wink secret codes and act ways that don't. Well, what you're saying is they're not breaking the law, and we want to change the law so we can address what we don't like. That's not the way this is supposed to work, but that's how it's working today, and it has been for a long time now. Here is Standing for Freedom Center. It says, like the plot to a dystopian movie. This is on December 8th, by the way, so it's last year. New York will now monitor social media writings, collect data, and use law enforcement to crack down on any expression it deems to be hate speech, which, by the way, is not actually a crime. But who cares, right? Because government says. Of course, we cannot talk about this without folding in what Elon Musk said yesterday. The first condition of progress is the removal of censorship, is what he quoted Durant. Oh, yeah, well then, as 9/11 Revisited says, well then stop what you're doing. Freedom of speech, but limited reach is soft censorship. Well, how about other than that, you're just blatantly censoring people on top of that, or whoever's in control of that. But let's not pretend like it's Elon Musk pressing buttons. It could be. Bottom line, Twitter is censoring people. It's unbelievable. Anybody is still pretending that's not the case. You know, what we've done is almost reverted back for some people to the way it was before censorship was understood and openly regarded, where it was like, oh, this person got censored today for this post. And the whole Twitterverse kind of goes, oh, well, they probably did something wrong. Oh, they might have been on this. And just finds a reason to look the other way. A lot of it anyway, which is, by the way, what was happening back. Remember, a lot of us, when it was on the YouTube issue, we were going, I'm being censored. And they were like, well, you probably broke the rules. Well, maybe, or maybe not. That we can all see today was totally not what was happening in most cases. Point is, they are censoring. They are suppressing information right now, aggressively so, around Israel. And I'm going to make a point to you right now, actually, once we get in part after nanotechnology, about what I see as bots and manipulation. But just realize, guys, that there is a wholesale, across the board power structure manipulation happening. And it's not left and right. It is about people versus government. And we're watching it play out. And right now, people that are acting like it's only one side or the other, whether they know it or not, are the ones sealing our death certificate, signing our death certificate. They're driving you into a position to be less secure, to be more susceptible to this eventual control structure. And I quite frankly think that most of them do know that. And it's just about their immediate benefit and their immediate clout and their ability to keep you and in line with what they're being told to say or what they somehow think is going to give them some kind of monetary gain. Now, I'm not saying everybody, clearly, but I think it's quite a lot. Now, another point I wanted to get to in the beginning, just in case you didn't see this, this is just wild to me. And I couldn't not make a point about this. My brother actually shared this with me. This was from yesterday, March 29th, 2024. A proclamation on Transgender Day of Visibility. Right. Because this topic needs visibility, right? It was one of the most widely expressed topics in the world for like the last year, but let's make sure we give it a whole day so make sure we can see it even more. It's all politics, guys. This is another ploy to try to win and squeeze out a few more points for whatever they're trying to achieve. And again, I don't think election. I think we're still pretending your vote means anything at the end of the day. Then you're not paying attention, in my opinion. But hey, do you think it does? I could be wrong. Go for it. Bottom line is, I think this is about swaying people's opinions about larger political moves with what's going on with Israel. I mean, don't forget their whole big dishonest and completely illegitimate argument that somehow Israel's a bastion of LGBT communities. It's just embarrassingly wrong. But no, it's about trying to get you to think the right thing that they want you to think. But here's what it says. And guess what day this falls on? On Transgender Day of Visibility, we honor the extraordinary courage, they say, and contributions of transgender Americans and reaffirm our nation's commitment to forming a more perfect union. Right. Okay, so what does somebody's sexual preference have to do with any of that? Right? The more perfect union was based around, quite frankly, specifically in this sense about the melting pot of America, the idea that it's about sexual ideology or specifically around the manipulation of that concept that's aimed specifically at young children, which we'll briefly point out. If you remember our conversation about this, especially from this platform, never have I argued that it's in adults, that it's always the adult's choice to make a choice about however they want to live their life, as long as you're not hurting somebody else or forcing it on somebody else's opinion or somebody else's children. The moment that this becomes aimed at children, I don't know why anybody is okay with that. The idea, and I'm not talking about saying you think whatever you want. I'm talking about going, here, have you thought about thinking like this? That's a problem. Teachers should not be hoisting sexual concepts on children who haven't even gone on past puberty. I can't even believe that we have to express that. But it says where all people are created equal and treated equally throughout their lives. Really? I know we love to pretend that fantasy exists, but let's pretend like that doesn't apply to the Palestinian people or it doesn't apply to any other. I mean, how about the Syrian people? How about the Iraqi people? How about any number of groups that are specific ethnicities that you very clearly do not treat equally? But let's pretend like I guess it's only these color people over here on these parts of the world. Yes. I mean, it's just so insulting, and of course, what's even worse about that is even briefly flirting with concepts like equality or that it's skin color or, in me, it raises the suspicion of certain people in the right-wing community, which is crazy to me. It's nothing to do with woke talking points. It's about the transparent, obvious example of the world. Look at their foreign policy. Look at the way they've conducted their foreign policy. How can you pretend for 1 second that it does not have a very clear slant? In any case, back on the transgender point, it says they deserve and are entitled to the same rights and freedoms as every other American, and they've got them already. So we're done? No, because we're going to pretend like there's some kind of detriment here or some kind of chasm between what we deal with as normal Americans, which, by the way, is the way they're framing this. Somehow they're different, and the other, which, by the way, is what they're doing with the way they create this. But they've got all the same rights anybody else does. All they're trying to do is pretend by not allowing that 3-year-old to watch people dancing naked, somehow that's a violation of their rights. But it's not. They're violating that child's rights or rather, violating damn near everything sacred by doing that. But it says, but extremists. Oh, hold on. I make sure I didn't miss the. It is right down there. I'll get to it in a second. I want to make sure you saw the date. Including the most fundamental freedom to be their true selves. Well, nobody is arguing that they can't be their true selves. You're arguing that they need to mutilate their bodies to meet what they think, or rather what they've been convinced, which is often what they later regret. Most, by the way, we'll get into quick in a second, what they were told that they were probably like because they are uncomfortable or they're a tomboy or they played with the wrong toys. Now suddenly let's cut off all your body parts and change them into this and you'll be your true self. Well, maybe. Or maybe that's just what made them feel better in the moment, or maybe down the line they regret everything. But the truth is, if you're talking about being your true self, and even within this conversation, that God made me this way, well, that's the whole point. Whether or not you're religious, but that's the argument that gets put into this. So you're literally saying that you were made and that God didn't make a mistake, but then you're changing what God made. I mean, the idea of being the freedom to be your true selves does not entail the idea of lopping off parts of your body. Now, an adult, you do whatever you want. That's your prerogative. The idea that this ever became something about prepubescent children or post that before they're an actual adult, because both were happening and sadly in some cases still are, that's grotesque. That is wrong in every sense of the word. It says, but extremists are proposing hundreds of hateful laws that target and terrify transgender kids and their families. No, they're not. I've looked at every single one of these laws, and every single one of them is aimed at things like the transgender story time or the idea of the books that are clearly sexually explicit for children that are not even in puberty. Guys, that's grotesque. It's wrong. And again, from a person that has argued from the very beginning of this, that I've got transgender people that are fans of the show, that I respect their rights as adults to do whatever they want, whatever my opinions may be, because that's being objective. That's being open-minded. But the moment that this gets pushed on them, children, it's just wrong. And to pretend like these laws are somehow hateful or that they're terrifying, no, you're protecting children. Based on everything we've ever argued made sense in this conversation. But suddenly, you're fighting to allow a stripper to read a book to these children? I mean, look, even other burlesque dancers or trans, I'm just blanking on the term for the term, like a man that dresses up like a woman and dances at these clubs. Many of them have spoken out, drag dancing. They've spoken out and said, this is inherently sexual, which again, we shouldn't need to even make that point. Of course it is. It is a fetish in and of itself. And again, I could go off. I haven't talked about this in a while. I could go off on all the things we talked about. The, gynophilia, or was it there's all these fetishes that overlap with this that have been proven, that have been discussed, that have been studied. And now you've got these people, not everybody in the community or in this category, but people that are becoming trans because they want to be in the women's bathrooms. And we've seen examples of this happening, or people in prisons being put in the wrong prisons and then raping people. I mean, it's just a nonstop reality. Doesn't mean every single one of them, but if it's possible, obviously. It goes on to say, silencing teachers, banning books, and even threatening parents, doctors, nurses with prison for helping parents get care for their children. You know, what's crazy about it is the exact reverse is also happening. Literally, that they are attacking people for this violently. Trans rights or else. We keep seeing that from some of them, not everybody. The idea, though, that you're in reverse saying that they're banning books and silencing teachers, it has specifically been about the idea of children. And it doesn't matter whether it's a trans book or a gay book or a heterosexual book about sexuality. All of them are deemed inappropriate. And that's very clear, and you can prove it. There's not, like, this is the point. If they're pretending it's only about this one conversation, then show me all the heterosexual books describing fellatio. I don't see them. But these bills attack our most basic American values. Hardly. What are the most basic American values? That we should allow children to see stripping adults, or that we should allow them to be around sexuality before they understand what they're looking at? I mean, how could you even say that? But the scary thing about that sentence, coming especially from Joe Biden, is that they mean that. It says the freedom to be yourself, the freedom to make your own health care decisions, and even right to raise your own child. I almost fell out of my chair. Now, first of all, when I just talk about this, is what I was saying. They believe that what they're describing, or whatever, not believe in the sense that those are American values, but this is what they're claiming are American values. That's an alarming fact. But then it goes on to say the freedom to be yourself. Okay, unless you're a MAGA person, or unless you believe in the wrong topics, or unless you say the wrong things. But let's pretend like they mean that so broadly. Or the freedom to make your own health choices. Oh, except unless you want an injection. Oh, unless you, we could go off forever about this, even in other conversations from the other side about whether you can get an abortion. All of this, the paradigm, the idea that they all pretend it's all, you can always have the right to own a gun. Oh, wait, unless you're trans. The right did that. Right? There's all these, that is the reason the two-party illusion is always lost, in my opinion. But either in this particular, largely from the left of the conversation, the freedom to make your own healthcare decisions, how can you possibly write that knowing what you just did? And it says, and even the right to raise your own child. I mean, guys, these are people that are trying to take children away from people because of their political beliefs. It blows me away, the kind of hypocrisy, the kind of double standard you can see in this stuff. And quite frankly, that they know they're doing that. It's just trying to recreate reality. But then it says it's no surprise that the bullying and discrimination that transgender Americans face is worsening. Not as far as I can see. Now, there's bullying and there's hatred all over the place for everything, all the time. There's going to be people that hate other people. The idea that we used to be taught to just turn the other cheek kind of conversation. Today, it's make it your identity. The point, though, is that the mental health crisis we're seeing has been proven, which I'll show you next, to be directly tied to the fact that they're giving children manipulative, untested, dangerous treatments that literally directly affect their hormonal makeup, their future, their bone structure. I mean, and then we pretend like those things are destroying who they are. No. It's that you said mean words to them, so they later took their life, which, again, could be possible. The reality is the statistics, the facts very clearly show you what's really going on. It says leading half of transgender youth to consider suicide in the past year. Yeah, well, Biden, did you look at what they said about that? When you actually read the statistics and the studies where most of them are regretting their decisions, which is the fact, but they don't want you to see that because this is politicized, which means they're literally allowing children to be mutilated and lying about the stats because they want this for some political reason. It's no different than them siding with Israel while they murder children. They don't care about these things, guys. At the same time, it says an epidemic of violence against transgender women and girls, especially women of girls of color. And, it's weird. They kept making that point the whole time, and I've never really seen that stand out. Unless you just want to argue that there's more violence toward people of color in general, which, I don't see that necessarily. It could be the case. There's all these political dynamics around it, but who knows? And it says continues to take too many lives. Well, yeah, a lot of these people are whether it's taking their own lives because of things we discussed, or ultimately that they're having life-threatening issues, which are part of these as well because of the surgeries. But it says, let me be clear, Biden writes, all of these attacks are un-American and must end. Un-American. It's un-American to petition your government to change things that you don't like. No, what he's trying to pretend is it's all violent. It's all aggressive, violent attacks. But didn't you just outline how they're trying to change the books and you could say ban books, but you're doing the same thing when it comes to words you don't like about Israel and whatever else. The point is you're trying to take this process. Is it un-American to fight for what you believe in? No, it's just they want to, anything that they don't like from either side becomes un-American, right? All those Democrats, un-American, white woke politics, the right, all un-American terrorism and support for, it's un-American. Well, quite frankly, the two-party illusion is un-American as far as I'm concerned. But it says the Department of Justice has taken action to push back against extreme and un-American state laws targeting transgender youth and their families. And the Department of Justice is partnering with law enforcement and community groups to combat hate and violence. These laws, again, are the same thing we just talked about, and I've gone over them. So what they're really saying is they're now going to use the Department of Defense to go after states and the laws they've created because they've deemed them hateful and violent. But that's not how democracy is supposed to work. The fantasy we live in, where we have this wonderful democracy where everything works equally, even though that's not even what democracy means. The point is that this is them just applying their own power to shift what they want. And this is the back and forth childish game that we all pretend is the highest level of governmental whatever. Like it's just childish. And we can see it plainly in the way that they act, the way that they engage with each other and in political settings, in Congress. They're petty, they're small, and they're vindictive. We all know that. And it says, my administration is also providing dedicated emergency mental health support through our nationwide suicide and crisis lifeline. Well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their health support is needed because of what you're doing to them, and we can prove that. But lastly, it says, hereby proclaim March 31st. Oh, Easter. Because that's not a weird thing to do, right? To make the transgender day of visibility on a Christian holiday. I mean, guys, it's almost like you're trying to upset people. Now, I'm not saying you have to adhere to every Christian value or Biden is a Zionist, so maybe that plays a factor. But I think what's crazy about this is why wouldn't you do it on any other day, knowing that this is something that from a very staunch Orthodox Christian perspective is wrong? I don't agree with that. I don't think being gay is wrong or deciding to do. I mean, again, I do think that what transgender has become and what most of people are going through is not. It should not end up where you cut pieces off your body. I do think that's a problem, but I acknowledge a person's right as an adult to do whatever they want. But my point is, from a Christian perspective, the argument is that that's, for some people's minds anyway, is wrong. Just being gay in many Christians' minds. A lot of Christian right think that. So then the point of choosing it on this day, guys, I think that's a very clear message. And that's insulting, even to me, even though I'm not somebody that feels that my point is that I think it's meant to be insulting. I find that wild. So all that aside, the point is to recognize that this conversation was pretty much already put to bed. I mean, Matt Walsh destroyed this conversation right in the beginning, sort of in the beginning, and did a really great job on the documentary breaking this down. That's not to say I agree with everything he does. I mean, quite frankly, I think there was a whole thing about him and his kind of soft-footing the whole conversation of Israel, which I completely agree with. But the point is, he nailed it on this. And overall, this completely rolled back. The UK and even the WPATH, the group I'm going to point to here, they pulled this back entirely in the UK, saying that we're not even allowed to do this outside of special studies. That's coming back from the point of saying it's normal. It should be happening on the corner stores, like crazy level being pushed into everyday conversations. And now it just comes back like we're acting like nothing happened. Like, I want to make sure you didn't miss this. I was screaming about this probably every other day when this was a topic. Oh, yeah, I wanted to play this too. Well, so first, this is an article from Associated Press, June 15th, 2022. And the reason I thought this was so crazy, this was at the peak, the height of this conversation, where our Associated Press came out with an article that literally cited two leaders in the leading clinic in the world around transgender treatment. And they were both arguing that it was being done poorly, that they were over-treating children. I mean, everything. Things that were aggressively denied by all the governments and specifically people at the top of that conversation. And what's crazy to me, I'm downloading this in the background, is that it just kept going. My point is, though, that eventually it really did roll back in a really serious way. I'm just wondering why now all of a sudden this is kind of drifting back in, because it has been even in other countries. But I'll read what it says. Members of the nation's leading transgender advocacy group, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, spoke about, quote, sloppy treatment given to kids without adequate counseling. The current president, at least when I wrote this, raised concerns about hasty treatment. The link is right here. You can see it for yourself. This is the article. And here's what it said. Here's what was important. I think was the important parts of this. It says critics, including some from within the transgender treatment community, say some clinics are too quick to offer irreversible treatment to kids who would otherwise grow out of their gender questioning. That's coming from the leading group. And these are critics from within the treatment community, guys. And it's just, we ignore all this. What's crazy is it's just like what's going on with Israel right now. It's not that we're going, oh, well, there's a disagreement. Even though these are like the leading people in the field, it just becomes, when on Twitter we discuss it, they say that's fake and you're not racist at this point. It would have been what? That you're anti-trans or whatever it is. You hate, whatever the terms were flying around at that time. There's always the big button words. And they just disregarded it. They said, that's not true. You're wrong. You're disgusting. You hate people. Same thing was happening with Israel right now, even though this was the case. It just blew my mind. The psychologist Erica Anderson resigned her post as a board member of the leading transgender health group in the world, WPATH, after voicing concerns about sloppy treatment given to children without adequate counseling. She stayed with the group because she wanted to try to change it, but she resigned her board position because she knew they were giving sloppy treatment. How do we move past something like that? How do we allow what essentially amounts to genital mutilation with no real investigation? When you look into it, it was ruining children, and it still is, that are going through it, including puberty blockers, all sorts of long-term issues that they just ignored. And then the leading people stand up and say, yeah, we're rushing through this without any real, and then just nothing happens. Yeah, well, same thing with East Palestine. Same thing with endocrine disrupting chemicals or glyphosate or any number of tests and bombings and acts your government do that never get held accountable for. Now, I'm not saying that to make you feel that we're losing everything. I want you to see how completely obvious it is that these people, the governments, the power structures are so obviously corrupt and so over the top that they know you see it. And right now, that's what the point was in the beginning. They're so desperately trying to force this back in. Now, it says that she is still a group member that supports the updated guidelines, which emphasize comprehensive assessments before treatment. But she says dozens of families have told her that doesn't always happen, which, by the way, that's a big deal. Just giving them treatment without even concerning themselves. I mean, remember all the stuff we went through, all the different documents and internal messages where they were like, just give them what they want. Don't even ask. If they say that, just give it to them. That was people in the leading positions that were saying that. Disgusting. It says, they tell me horror stories. They tell me our child had 20 minutes with the doctor before being offered hormones, which changed them forever. The parents leave with their hair on fire. Estimates of the numbers of transgender youth It says Anderson said she'd heard recent estimates suggesting the rate of kids as high as 1 in 5, which is provably false, guys. This is why you have stars out there they have 3 daughters, and hey, weird, all 3 of them are trans. That's statistically impossible, guys. I mean, actually, it's just highly unlikely, I should say. Very highly mathematically unlikely. But Marcy Bowers, who is the transgender health group's president, raised concerns about the treatment, and yet it's just still kept happening. Dr. Julia Mason, an Oregon pediatrician, who raised concerns on speaking with AP about the increasing numbers of youngsters who are getting the treatment, said too many in the field are jumping the gun. These are 3 leading experts in the world, and nobody cared. She argued that there's strong evidence in favor of the treatment, but she said in medicine, the treatment has to be proven safe and effective before we start recommending it, which they disagree with. Crazy to me. I'll include this. This is one of the many articles at the time, the weaponization of the transgender movement and the focus on your kids. Now, I just wanted to include that, guys, as much as that's going to make the show a hell of a lot longer before we get into the bigger parts. I do think it's important that we see this is still being pushed by people like Biden, of all people, which is just ridiculous to me. Now, so let's get into the glimpse of the technocratic panopticon that is being built. Now, I wanted to start with this just because it's impossible for me not to see how this overlaps with the COVID-19 injection conversation. Dr. Simon Godek had a great thread that he posted yesterday. It says, let's start the day with something positive. He says it's not the mRNA vaccines that cause increasing cancer and heart attack rates. At first, I was like, oh my God, did he change his mind? It's like, I think that's shockingly obvious, but he's making a point. He says, thanks to our dedicated investigative mainstream journalists, the reasons for them have finally been revealed. Here are my top 20. He says, drugs. Heart problems have more than doubled because of other drugs. Or how about gardening? Right? That's why your heart's having problems. That's killer heart disease because you garden too much. How about being too happy? Being too happy? Yeah, that'll do it. Not the dangerous experimental gene therapy, but because you laugh too much that day. How about, you exercise too much? Or the fact that you have explained by extreme weather. Being too happy. Flight delays. Woo, heart attack, right? Oral sex. Eggs. Open blinds. Guys, these are not jokes, by the way. Warning to anyone who sleeps with blinds open. It may increase your risk of heart attack by 40%. I wonder if that just happens to overlap with the idea that people who happen to have had the injection and, like you could find a way, like my point is, let's say you did this study and you literally just did this is you do this overlap with almost anything. Like you just take a broad study and you say, have you had a heart attack in the last however many months or years or whatever? Don't even, of course, never include the injection overlap. Then just say, okay, how many of you have sleep with the blinds open? And they go, oh my God, 40% overlap. Like that could be meaningless. That's like saying everybody who rides a motorcycle today, or rather everyone who rides a bike when they're a kid ends up riding a motorcycle. Well, I bet you there's a pretty serious overlap right there. But is that always how it works? And the point is you can just find these connections, but it doesn't mean that that's why it happens. But they do. That's how you lie with statistics all the time. Lack of masking, of course. In fact, it's the mask, which we've proven has a serious increase on systemic inflammation, which can very clearly lead to all sorts of heart problems. But of course, the lack of mask is what'll do it. You get the point. That's only 11 reasons. He goes on for 10 more. The point is, it's embarrassing the way they tried to hide all this. But in the meantime, let's put up defibrillators in your preschools because it's totally about being too happy. I'll include, that was the point about, first of all, just realizing that this is ridiculous, realizing one more thing that they continue to hide from you that is slapping everybody in the face that they know you know about. The point is, what's that going to lead to? Right? There's so many angles spinning off of the injection conversation. Digital IDs, social credit, vaccine passports, all sorts of different things. And we'll get into the other more invisible aspects. But one of the big parts that we talked about from the injection itself was obviously the digital ID. Arguing that, well, we need this because passing vaccine passports, right? But then, of course, when that kind of fell in the background, they said, well, we still need digital IDs, though, for this other reason, though. Oh, okay. So it was only really ever about the digital push, not whatever excuse you can use, which is almost always how this works. Now, of course, the vaccine passport will swing back around at some point, just like the social credit, which is connected to all of it. And if you don't think that's the truth, you're just literally not paying attention. These people are praising those concepts. The point is, the digital ID is one of the big barriers that they're trying to push in to be able to create all of these next steps, or rather just the ability to control you through these different mechanisms to force you into these next steps. And this was just one of the amazing articles Derek wrote, which I believe he's writing about digital ID again, but don't take my word on that. But the article is entitled NYU School of Law warns digital ID is, quote, paving a digital road. It's things like that just blow my mind. It's like, not like we should blindly listen to the NYU School of Law. No, blindly listen to anybody. But it's kind of wild. Oh, that wasn't our link. It's kind of wild that this can be a leading group, at least in the mainstream conversation. And they put out a document that literally says paving a digital road to hell. This is the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice, but it was from the NYU School of Law. And it isn't even addressed by the corporate media. Like, they just jump right over it. And it shows you just nothing is sacred to these people. It doesn't matter. It's about agendas, right? That's why suddenly when the British Medical Journal comes out early about Brooke Jackson's revelations, they suddenly get called a health blog. 30 seconds ago, they were the leading medical journal in the world, or one of them. And now they get relegated to a health blog by the corporate media because they dare to say the thing you're not supposed to say. Which, by the way, no, don't forget, we're the first ones to interview Brooke Jackson. And that important conversation, I think, still has a lot of weight in what this ultimately has become. And she's still doing a lot of great work out there. Make sure you check her out. The point was, though, that was an important moment in TLAV, I think, because we had contacted her. We reached out to her of our own accord, and then spent the next month and a half essentially talking her. She didn't want to do it. She was concerned. She didn't know if it was going to, hadn't done any interviews before that, and we talked about it, and we, I was patient, and, I was proud of the way that worked out, because I think that we got a really amazing interview. And then from there, she went on to do so many amazing interviews about this. And I feel that we at least had some part in that, and I think that's important. And I think that what she's doing is changing this conversation, and maybe will in a really serious way if they can get a really big legal win, which they've already had some. But make sure you check that out. And actually, if I have this pop up, here is, let me see if this is the first one. Yeah, here it is. Pfizer whistleblower exposes cover-up, calling vaccine data into question. Important. First one, even though it rarely get that recognition. But so the other one is the exposing the digital ID as a human rights scam. Another great one from Derek, which this is their other push about saying, well, what about all these small countries that don't have any electronics, and it's not fair. It's a human right to have this digital. They don't want it. They're using that excuse to convince Western audiences that they need to force it on these other countries when they're going, get the hell away from me in most cases. But just to show you that this is a huge central part of where this goes, which all of you mostly know. Now, this is a clip. Oh, actually, I forgot to grab this one. I'll grab that while it's playing. Taylor Hudak had a great interview with Professor Berner. And this is his clip. This is posted on the 29th. I think this is from a little bit before that. But basically just talking about where this goes. Now, you can disagree with him. In fact, I do in a way disagree that I don't think, and this is the point I'm going to make next, it's the rice-sized chip when we talk about these things. I think that's the manipulation. I think we're way, way past that kind of technology. Nonetheless, it's a good way to get people introduced to where this is going. And and again, these are publicly discussed conversations about the next steps. And the way he describes this, it's logical. It's only our concern about it that makes this kind of a touchy subject. And they try to pretend like that's not really ever going to happen until it's right in your face and it's too late, which is always how this goes. Remember, vaccine passports were a fake news conspiracy theory until the next year. It was a conspiracy theory to say they shouldn't happen, like on a dime. And like we couldn't, it was how embarrassing. So here he is discussing now the CBDCs and the overlap with digital ID and the idea of how this all connects. It's a foregone conclusion, guys, unless we can stop this. I think this is already, it is already happening.
The idea had been by central banks to introduce this, as we said, central bank digital currency. But have you ever seen an article or a video or, whatever description of what it actually looks like? I mean, with central bank paper money, we know what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
Bank digital currency, we know, and we've used it ourselves. We know what it looks like. But what does central bank digital currency look like? You see? So they never talk about that because people won't actually like the looks of it.
Yeah.
Because it apparently looks, and several central banks apparently, as I as I heard from my sources, have already fully developed the final stage of CBDC. I mean, it comes in stages initially, likely through your mobile phone, but that's only an intermediate step. And the final stage is, it's small, and it's the size of a grain of rice. Now, why is that?
And that grain of rice is your entire wallet, or?
Yes, it's your digital ID, your wallet, can be your passport, your key. Now, of course, what we found with our debit cards or credit cards is they've already now moved to the system, RFID chips, RFID technology, where you just wave the thing, contactless.
Yes.
That is sort of the conditioning us in this direction. That in the future you'll just wave your hand because you've got the microchip implant under your skin.
Which we all know is happening. I mean, Sweden made a big talk about it. I mean, there's entire communities that make their entire companies that do this, entire communities that have done this. It's all over the world. So that's what I always find so strange. There are people that act like this is conspiracy theory while it's literally already happening. And that they tell you they want to do that in many cases, but conspiracy theory.
And because, and each step, there's a rational reason, it's easier just to wave this, isn't it? It's much faster because we always have to wait in the queues as everyone types in their numbers and all that. So just wave it, it's quicker. But the next rationalization would be, but you can lose your card, somebody can steal your card, and then you're just waving, that's kind of risky. Well, wouldn't it be nice if you couldn't lose it and nobody could steal it? But it's clear that that's it is almost a step too far for a lot of people, because it is a violation of human dignity to actually inject something like that under the skin. So that's where you need some more persuasion. Yeah. And it's interesting that this concept of universal basic income has been around for around a century, where everyone should get some kind of citizens, payment. But the billionaire elites have so far not liked that. But since 2015, they've all come out. I mean, all the big billionaires and World Economic Forum have come out. Oh, this is a good idea, universal basic income.
Don't forget Andrew Yang kind of put that really on the map for a lot of average people. Yeah, for all we know, that was an attempt to see if we would take it. Right? Vote him in because we want that. And then it would be our thing. If we had voted him in, that would have happened. Whether that was designed or not. At the very least, it planted the concept in people's minds as like a discussion point on the table of elections and future, and then of course they tie that to the idea that, we're going in this direction of technocracy and building machines. And so we're going to have to do that because you'll have no job. Well, the whole premise of our issue is that we don't want to go in that direction. So don't act like it's a foregone conclusion. And here's why we have to do the next step. That's usually how this goes. And, a lot of innocent people just get caught up in that, thinking like we have to make this choice because what else are we going to do? Don't go in that direction is what we do.
Well, why suddenly now? Because now we have the technology for the microchip implant. And so in 2017, Bill Gates came out and said that universal basic income is a good idea, but it's too early to introduce it. Now, what was still missing? So we had the technology for the microchip implant, but what was missing was the digital ID hadn't been introduced. Now, this is where this whole COVID agenda had become very useful.
Yep. Here's the interview that Taylor did. COVID measures and the central controls over the economy. That was August 2021. As usual, TLAV pretty damn ahead of the curve, in my opinion, but, I'll pull my arm, pat myself on the back. Here is the next article that I think is in the kind of next step. Now, what he says is in regard to the microchip, the rice size concept. Now, those exist, right? But I really always want you to stand back and ask, is that just a means to an end? Is that because, as they've clearly said, because they've been advancing technologically rapidly? Like, just look back through history about how long it took to reach a stage, and then the next stage after that, and after that, it's exponentially shorter almost every time. And so my point is that where we're at, like if you go back to what he said just about Bill Gates saying that's what we need, but we're not ready for it. Well, just even right there between that and now, how much has actually developed? It's wild. my point is, if you can go back and see, which I've done on this show, and prove that they were using smart dust from a government perspective at the very least, in a testing circumstance, in a real world setting, which means that's out there to some degree or more. I don't know is the point, but it is real and it does exist, which I've proven on this show. And more so, like right up until this very day. Why is that not part of the conversation? If we're talking about rice-sized microchips, when in reality, these images on the show you can see now, that's a human hair. That's what we're actually talking about. And if not, far smaller than that. I might as well play this real quick, actually. See, no, I've already taken an hour for this. Didn't plan. I guess we're going to be a long show, just like I thought it would be. But here is the, where was it? It's under Smart Dust. Oh, of course. Well, if you guys were on the show last time, there's something wonky going on here with this StreamYard. Maybe I have to switch up platforms. It's not letting me do things pretty consistently lately, just randomly for no reason. Like one video won't be able to upload. Nah, I shouldn't even tell you, wasting time. But there's different places you have to do it. Just give me a second. I have to do it on the sidebar now instead of the main part. Now, this is the symposium I've showed you many times. That just make sure you know this. This video is about 10, or what was it? I think it was about 2011, if I remember correctly. And he's talking about smart dust that was usable, DARPA smart dust, something else called a Mu chip that goes back 10 years before that. So we're talking like early 2000s. This stuff is already like high level and in use. And my point is, you go back 20 years before that, and you can prove that they were already testing and using this. And it was a public conversation, but people just didn't talk about it because it was either perceived as not real or too early or whatever it is, but it was real. It was happening.
You can literally scatter this stuff like dust or embed it into a sheet of paper. This was commercially released 10 years ago. It's a tiny computer, and it features data processing, data storage, wireless comms, and it's probably as close to the true smart dust vision from the early DARPA days as we've come so far. They're designed to harvest energy from the environment around them and to communicate via a mesh network.
That was over 20 years ago, right? I mean, and that's DARPA. That's a DARPA point. And so, again, every time I bring it up, there's always somebody that goes like, oh, my God. Like, it's amazing to me how public this stuff is, and yet we don't know it. And this is my point in this article. Is smart dust already in use in the population, which is a unequivocal yes. It could be in a very small example in one corner of the world. It's a yes, though. And was COVID-19, whatever that really was, an attempted experimental next step? Now, if you don't know what that means, watch the show, because it's just theorizing about whether or not the covering up of this for the last 30 years, as far as I can tell, and whether and the next step of what this was an attempt to try to see something. Watch it for yourself. It's more of a theoretical, but the first part is 100%. We go over the documents, we go over the background. It's an important show. So my point is, if they've got smart dust, if they've got things this level, and I don't mean just very tiny, minute computational concepts. I mean, like he just showed you, things that can relay information, things that can track, things that can relay two-way communication via, like distances. Like this is the point, that it works on your own body's motion, your own body's energy. Things that, like he said, you can spray into the air and it will land on your skin, and they can relay information across in far distances. That's what that was. That's a 20-year-old thing we're talking about. So ask yourself, how is it that we're talking about rice-sized chips when we know that you can do the exact same thing with something far, far smaller? I should say no as much as we know anything. Of course, people argue, for example, that people I respect, by the way, that this stuff is not real. That this is more about them trying to. I had a great interview with blanking on his name. I want to interview him again, actually. Dr. Jay Cooey. Really, really, really smart guy. A really fascinating conversation. And he argued that he thinks that they're not successfully doing this, that it's more about the projection in the future, sort of like the moon landing conversation, to scare people away with that. The point is that I think that it was about projecting what they would want to accomplish, not that it was never possible, but we know they lied about these things. And my point is, he thinks that it's ultimately about the projection of it. But, I see a lot of things that are hard for me to ignore. So at the very least, I want to consider that that's possible. Now, from there, I just want to show you a couple of things. This is from Science Daily. This is from 2 days ago. Just a quick little overview of some of the things that are in the work, in the pipes, right? Oh, by the way, just interestingly enough, which I'll go over next, toxic metal particles in cannabis vapes. That's interesting. That's interestingly a throwback to the beginning of the whatever the COVID-19 conversation was. But we'll come back to that. May 18th, backyard insect inspires invisibility device, next gen tech. What? Like, think about these things. Like, if you came on Twitter today and said they're making invisible insect devices that they would call you an idiot. Like, but by the way, who cares what ridiculous people on Twitter think? But nonetheless, you know that's how this works. So it's interesting, isn't it? That these things are real and it is happening, or at least they're projecting that. And it says DNA origami-based vaccine towards safe and highly effective precision cancer immunotherapy. Now, these origami vaccines, I'm pretty sure that's based on the graphene or graphene oxide kind of, or at the very least, self-assembling nanoparticle concepts. Spiral wrapper switches nanotubes from conductors to semiconductors and back. Interestingly enough, by the way, this whole semiconductor conversation is getting forced into the view because of that 3-body show or whatever it's called. Interestingly timed too, right? The whole point of that show, by the way, is like that all these semiconductors around the world just suddenly started working wrong or something happened, and it's like this whole transdimensional concept. Like, maybe they're trying to push us into something. Either way, it's an interesting thing. I've always wondered whether the whole semiconductor thing was, some of the statements they make about like CERN and what they're able to do. It's you don't want to believe it. It sounds crazy, but they've publicly said things like reaching into other dimensions and bringing things over. I've talked about this. I'm not saying I believe it's real. I'm saying who knows, but they've said that. My point is that this is something that I think is being kind of slowly talked about more and more. In any case, we are so far beyond what we're talking about rice-sized microchips, right? GPS nanoparticle platform precisely delivers therapeutic payload to cancer cells. New type of nanoparticle makes vaccines more powerful. Using light to precisely control single molecule devices. Well, that's right out of Charles Lieber, Robert Langer, COVID-19 overlap conversations. There's plenty more we can get into. But okay, the first one being toxic metal particles in cannabis vapes. Oh, actually, before I come back to that, I wanted to point this out as well. So we're talking about the CBDCs, right? And Richard Werner and his discussions. They made a lot of waves. Now, I want to point this out because this is something that was coming up in a lot of the research that is being spread. And I don't often try these days to make a point about one individual, one group, whatever else, but I just have to point this out because I made this point before. This platform is terrible. And it is constantly, I honestly have not seen a single post from this platform that has not been lying in some way, shape, or form. I could always be wrong. But I want you to say that. I want to just point that out because my interest is making sure you are being objective and that we all say the truth. So this platform says, the WEF says CBDCs must be implanted under your skin if you want to participate in society. Now, any objective person can say, wow, that's a strong statement. Like, even though you could argue that seems like what they want and sort of what we're talking about seems to be the inevitable future, did they really say that? And then, of course, the point becomes, and a lot of the people on Twitter that try to act like it's okay to be dishonest with headlines is, well, that's what they're doing. Well, even if you believe that, even if that's true, that is still ridiculous because that's not what they said. So all you're really doing is creating the truth in a way that makes it look fake so people can dismiss it, which I think is a clear agenda. In any case, look, it's been fact checked. That's what it says right there. Try to zoom in. There it is. Anyway, so the article, if you read it, says, according to Professor Richard Werner, in the very near future, citizens will need to use the latest technology, such as CBDC chip implants, in order to access their bank accounts. Now, what he says is that's the likely future where it's going. In any conversation I've seen him have, he's not saying they're doing it. We know it's happening, not as far as I can tell. But even if he is, that is not the WEF saying that you have to implant it in order to participate in society. Now, if you want to read the article, which I recommend you do if you want to be clear about this, nothing in this entire article in any way goes on to say or highlight or quote or anything that drives back to the World Economic Forum making a public statement that makes that case. The whole thing is about Professor Werner and his conversations and what he's explaining, the Federal Reserve and the microchips, and then it ends with, so they're using crises, disruption, and unemployment to introduce basic income. It's all his arguments, which he's right about, by the way, to soften public to accept these chips. And it says, you will get 2,000 euros into your account every month. But of course, to run this efficiently, we need to use the latest technology. Okay, what is this based on? Now, by the way, there's another good video, by the way, from Igor Cummings, which is a great video, none of which in any way, shape, or form says anything about that headline. But you get people that defend this because they think that is what's happening. And maybe that is what's happening. Quite frankly, to a degree, I also agree with that. I do think that this is happening. I think CBDCs are obviously real. I think the idea of implantables is obviously real. I think it's very clear that it's most likely going in the direction where they're going to, in some ways, incentivize, and in some ways then coerce, and in some ways force, just like with the injection, over time, this exact situation. That is still not to say that we should be going, they say this, even though we know they didn't, and that's not true. Just because people who are subjective because of the two-party illusion, because of Twitter files, because they're being engineered to be, will take that. It's a big problem, guys, as much as there's far bigger problems. It's quite frankly far bigger a problem in my mind that the World Economic Forum is doing things like this and then lying about it. So I'm not saying like this is the peak problem. It's more important that we highlight the issues, but I think that there's these tangential pretenders that are absolutely, I mean, quite frankly, it's the same way that I see things like InfoWars, whether they know it or not, where they if they talk about it, therefore it's fake. And of course, that's the ignorance of the people that think that way, but it's an engineered reality. And then they come out with like these crazy things that look ridiculous and half points and selected information, partisan narratives that omit certain things. And then you can easily go, well, that seems dishonest to me. And I think it's designed that way, but I could be wrong. Now, here is the fact check, which, by the way, is not the reason I think this. I'm just pointing it out because it would remind me to point the reality out that they said, and you can look at their own documentation. The WEF did not announce that, which it didn't, and you can look it up for yourself. Just because a fact check, by the way, this fact check or that fact check says that it is, doesn't mean that it's right. The point is that they did not say that. And you can read through it. They have links and articles, and you can read from what they said. And the whole point is it comes back to the argument of the possibility. Now, the reality, though, is we know this is real, guys. It's an obviously real conversation. And what's weird, back to my point, is how obviously that is the case, and yet it still gets regarded in the other side of that as completely silly and fake and not even real. So you get that side. Think of it like the two-party paradigm of this conversation, where it's so flimsy and fake and you're a conspiracy theorist, to the other side saying it's the WEF forcing it already right now and you can't even eat without having it in your hand. Both sides are crazy and stupid, and then people who are stuck in the two-party paradigm ignore all of it or blindly take one side. And in any case, it equals to you not seeing the real picture. I just wish, I hope, every day, I harp on this so much, I just hope I win one more person every day because it's so transparent. But the microchip implants that let you pay with your hand. Yeah, but this is old. This is way before 2022, by the way. This stuff has been around for a while. But this one I found really fascinating. This is an article from WT Vox, but this actually been kind of widely reposted. I just happened to see it on this website first. And each one of them come along with links and stuff you can check out. But it says, implantable wearables, top 10 implantables soon to be in your body. 2023 from May. And these pictures are creepy too, by the way. And it's even that's a huge clunky microchip in comparison to what we're really at the stage of right now, right? But it says in the future, the smart sensors and implantable wearables, I think so. Well, let's talk about basically what they're saying these things are, what are coming, right? So this is a projected smartphone. Well, it's not too alarming just yet, but the idea being that it's one step removed. Now it's just a band on your wrist until eventually, well, you lose the band, like he's saying, and then okay, well, don't worry. We've got something you can just put a little sensor inside your hand and the screen pops up on your wrist, which, by the way, has already been displayed on plenty of futuristic movies. You just pop the thing on your hand and just the screen comes on your skin, right? We've all seen it. And you may not be harmed by that. My point is this is all about predictive programming, and we shouldn't be allowing or wanting or justifying implantable electronic devices without fully understanding or caring about what that will do, what that will create. There's different things, right? Creating, is my point, is about the way that these things will be used to control you. They can be shut off. They can be dictated. They can be hacked. But on top of that, how will they be used? What will they do? Or rather, the second part, how will these things can have detrimental health effects that they don't care about. Look at 5G. Look at nanotechnology in general. All these things are shown to have serious effects. They don't even care. They're not even researching these things right now. They're rushing forward with their technological future at your expense, just like the gene therapies they forced on everybody, which, again, we now know that they chose that direction, not because it was the best, not because it was the safest, but because it was what they wanted. That's now an open discussion. Now, they still argue that it's the best thing for everybody. They're still standing by that. But when that was the case, they were admitting that this was an untested concept. It was an experimental concept. They're arguing in the broader sense, whether they believe it or not, that it's the best for future societies. But we had to test it on the people that are all dying right now, right? So we'll get there. It's the long-term best future. Well, I don't even know if they believe that. The point is, all of these things have detrimental side effects that they're not testing for. Here is healing chipsets, which is just this we've talked about this already. Scientists in London are developing swallowable capsule circuits that monitor fat levels or God knows what else and relays information and, could potentially do something inside of you, kill you. These things are always considering this. Like, what was the one we talked about? The dual use. Oh, it was the, let's see, aerosolized. Yep, there it is. Also a very real concept, which is, this is kind of jumping ahead, we're going to get to, but this popped into my head just now. Just the idea of dual use. New aerosolized mRNA delivering nanoparticles can vaccinate or they can eliminate. Now, this was a very real, high-level conversation, which I don't think I'll be able to grab it up off the top here, but I believe it was MIT, and it was public. It was very, very clear. They said, look, we did a study, and these nanoparticles can deliver mRNA, right? They essentially vaccinate you, or they can turn off your body systems, or whatever the claim they made. It was very clear. So my point was, well, exactly, that this dual use, it can be a weapon or it can be something to help if you think a, quote, vaccine will, quote, help you. But either way, it's clearly how they see that. Right? So we're talking about these swallowable capsule circuits. Just think about the same thing. That's how these work, or can. Cyber pills connected to your doctor. Same concept in a slightly different angle. Implantable birth control pills. This is where it's all going, guys. Smart tattoos. Now realize, as much as they're pointing like this is in the future, all of these things are currently real and are happening and are even being used. They're just not mass adopted yet in many cases. Smart tattoos. That kind of overlaps with the first point. Brain-computer interfaces, which again, I actually even argue that the whole concept of wireless connection, I think they even mentioned in this display, I think that's a red herring. I think we're way past that when like magnetogenetics, optogenetics, that's the cutting edge that I think they're working on. I think this is sort of a means to an end, or even just not to make you think that's where we're at. I don't know. But it's strange to me that the leading level of science I can see in regard to the, the Langers and Robert Langers and Charles Liebers of the world, who, by the way, Lieber being the leading nanotech expert in the world, are way, way past that. Meltable bio batteries. Smart dust, which was my larger point right there. The thing that we're not supposed to acknowledge is actually real. And it says, with smart dust, doctors will be able to act inside your body without opening you, and information could be stored inside you, which is one of the real things that are already happening. Perhaps the most startling of current implantable innovations is smart dust. It's an array of full computers with antennas, each smaller than a grain of sand, way smaller than that. In fact, the grains can organize themselves inside the body into smart networks and power a whole range of complex. Yeah, I've been screaming about this for a decade. People still pretend like this isn't real. She's not saying this is what is going to happen in 40 years. It's what is already going on. It's been happening for 20. It says, imagine swarms of these nano devices called motes attacking every cancer cell, or killing you, or doing any number of other manipulative things for the benefit of your government or whatever else we're talking about. It's amazing that we disregard things like that, despite how often the government acts just like that. 3D printed smart organs, or, printed meat, or printed any number of things they're pushing on you. The verified self. Yeah, an implantable thing we're talking about. And of course, showing you this gigantic chip that's way, way, way in the past. But it says implantables hammer against social norms by raising privacy issues. But it says to a potential dystopia. I always love the lip service, but let's ignore that and talk about the fun things. That's what they're doing. Last but not least, on top 10 implantable wearables soon in your body, the verified self tech could be used to ID every single human being in the world. Does any human actually want that? Why does that even sound like what benefit anybody but an authoritarian government? The U.S. military already has a program. Of course they do. That's how it starts. In any case, let's talk about smart dust and how this next step is going, because this is real and it's happening right in front of us. Oh, here, let me add this real quick. So this is one of the things we discussed, and this going back to this point about toxic metal particles in cannabis vapes. It's a very strange thing. Now, that's why I played the Dr. Pilevsky thing in the beginning, where he's talking about the blood-brain barrier. Now, there was this weird conversation. If you don't remember, if you weren't there at the time, we were really one of the biggest people harping on this at the time. This weird connection between the vaping illness and whatever they claimed that was, and then whatever else was going on. In this case, some people argued it was COVID-19, but before it ever was said it was around, which is one of the things I considered. It's certainly possible if you believe that was what was happening. But the other argument is that there was, and this is one of the earliest things that we were talking about. Remember that this vaping, what was going on with this vaping conversation? What was being delivered? What was being deployed? Just as a hypothetical. Because this is where my mind is at now, and now it's all coming full circle. And we even thought about this halfway through this conversation. That was this an effort to actually deploy something? Was this why we had the outbreaks around Fort Detrick? Which, by the way, is what I have somewhere in here. We'll get to a lot of this. Right there. Revisiting Fort Detrick, vaping overlap, COVID origins. We went over all of this again in a very deep way. And the idea being that there was an outbreak right around Fort Detrick, right around the areas around the nursing homes, just kind of south northwest of that area. And what did they say? All this crazy cold, which by the way is a coronavirus, saying it had all sorts of ground glass opacity in the lungs and all these things that were weirdly tied directly with COVID for the beginning. Same thing over here in the nursing homes. Outbreaks, just like the whole COVID conversation going forward. Weirdly tightly controlled right around the areas this was happening. Right? Fort Detrick being a BSL-4 lab that's working on all of the things we're talking about, which has had leaks constantly in the past. I think it was one leak every 3 days for 7 years straight was directly from their talking points. You've covered all this. My point is, what could have this been something that started everything? Could it have been nothing even remotely connected to concepts of viruses? Could it have been a smart dust concept? Something like a virus-sized transistor that was being worked on in Harvard with Charles Lieber. Who knows? It certainly could be. This point was April 10th, 2020. An artificial intelligence computer suggested, based on the research, that the U.S. vaping illness was in fact actually COVID-19. Which, again, that could be the idea to try to force you back into thinking about it as a virus or not. Who knows? Nonetheless, it's an interesting overlap that ties back now to this idea about all the stuff that's happening and how these things can spread. Smart dust, aerosolization, it's all the same conversation right now. And this I talked about at the time. If you want to watch the show, by the way, this is May 12th, 2021. Israel to expand Gaza attacks, right? Let's pretend like it all started on October 7th, like people are being ridiculous. I saw an Indian comedian. I didn't want to show it because I felt like it was almost insensitive, but basically making fun of one of his audience members. But he was asking about this. Good on him for being brave. And he was basically saying like, oh, you follow what's going on. And they were like, yeah, it's Palestinians started it. And the guy was like, oh, they started it, did you? And they asked him again. And the guy goes, whoa, yeah, I know it's been going on for a long time, but and he jumps in and goes, oh, so you're only following this season? It's like, perfect. And they all laughed at him because the point is you're just choosing subjectively to ignore all the other history because this makes it work for you, Same thing. Anyway, the point of the article, AI says vaping illness was COVID-19, and you can watch our discussion of it there. Here was the overlap of this that connects the idea of Fort Detrick to the vaping conversation. Here is something that was shared with me. Oh, look, it's posted on my birthday, April 2nd, 2023. It says, Nano, the Internet of Bio-Nano Things in Blood Vessels, 2023. Just trying to show you guys that this is the kind of level we're talking about. The bio-nano things, that's nanotechnology. And that's the overlap of the biological and the technological. Just like, by the way, Klaus Schwab was telling you we were going to live through because of COVID-19. Weird, right? And blood vessels. And again, the Internet of Bio-Nano Things we also just talked about on the 20th of January this year. The Internet of Bio-Nano Things is upon us. That's what they're telling you. And this is one of the many studies talking about how this is real, and that's the level of the technology that we're at. This is another one as well, electronically controlled mRNA delivery using a polypryl graphene oxide hybrid film to promote. I mean, it's all the way, it's all the direction, all the direction it's going in. That is the self-assembling nanotechnology. Not a rice-sized static microchip, but far, far, far more we're talking about here. This one was how to mass produce thousands of tiny cell-sized robots. Down here it says, these tiny bots measure between 10 micrometers across, up to around 10 times that size, similar to the size of a human red blood cell. So think about that. This is an article from 2018. November 2018. And what this is technically about is actually it's graphene oxide specifically, or graphene, and they're using these sheets to basically the whole thing is about the way they shatter this to create these specific dots. But the point that's like buried in this is that that's what there exists. They're literally talking about blood, like graphene nanobots the size of a blood cell, or larger or smaller. But the point is that's generally what we're talking about. And they're discussing just what we were talking about. They start to look and behave like living biological cells. And that's the point that we go over in the Charles Lieber conversation, the virus-sized transistor, where he says the same exact thing that they found. It says this innovation is important because it indicates that when a man-made structure is as small as a virus or bacteria, it can behave the way biological structures do. Now, this work, again, very clearly overlaps with Robert Langer and his work that kind of perfectly, in my opinion, dovetails with all of this. And this is what we talked about, Whitney and I, Bob Langer, the coronavirus common denominator tied to Charles Lieber. And don't forget, this man you're looking at is the co-founder of Moderna, who is all working on all of this stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all in the shot, but I don't know why we wouldn't be concerned about how this is all being pushed in a very alarming way. And in 2018, they're starting to look like they behave like biological cells. Why don't we ask whether that is what we're dealing with? It says, in fact, under a microscope, you could probably convince most people that it is a cell. Think about that. So you mean basically they could be looking in microscopes and going, oh, that's COVID-19. It could be a nanobot for all we know. That's what they're telling you. It says the current work on auto fabrication follows from previous research. That wasn't the point. It says, well, it's great to imagine all the potential uses of these size cells from industrial monitoring to healthcare. 2018. In its innovative way, the devices themselves can produce, that is the highest of this research. It says this general procedure of using controlled fractures, what we were talking about, this method can be extended across many length scales. Cell-sized robotic devices, such as the Syn cell that they're using, could be suitable for a host of applications. It says for one demonstration, the team wrote the letter MIT, because the MIT was behind this, into the memory array inside the cell. That's what they're talking about, being able to store information in your DNA, in your body. It says, which stored the information as varying levels of electrical conductivity in your body. An electrical probe could then read this information, which showed how the material can function as electronic memory that allows information to be written, read, and erased. The Syn cell doesn't need power to retain the data. That's the other point we were making, which allows stored information to be collected at a later time. Right. So the bottom line is that's one angle of this. We already talked about how this can relay information. It can create all sorts of other, even biological processes. It can release things. It can cause your body to act certain ways. All of this is easily, as they just told you, could easily be blended in with the background of actual biology. And we can't miss the overlap with the people that I think are central to the conversation of whatever the hell COVID-19 was. Charles Lieber, and Robert Langer. Now, the self-spreading conversation, which we've talked about many times, I'll include that as well, just to think about how, including what we just talked about, this becomes far, far more relevant and seemingly likely. Self-spreading vaccines, self-amplifying mRNA, all these different things that we see and have evidence for as, COVID vaccine menstrual disruption, spreading amongst women that didn't take the vaccine, things like that. It's kind of hard to think about, whoa, this may be actually what's going on. But decide for yourselves. Also don't forget the overlaps here. As Decentralized News points out, Elon Musk partners with Gates-funded biotech company to produce mRNA microfactories for COVID-19 vaccines. Now, here's another example of this overlap. Here's the CTV News saying COVID vaccines don't cause cancer, but false claims persist in a sea of misinformation. This was March 23 of this year. You know what else just came out? We're baffled. Global cancer phenomenon. It's not just America. The UK, Japan, South Africa, and Australia are among dozens of countries suffering mystery spikes of all different kinds of tumors in young people, almost like a turbo cancer. Which, by the way, if you read it, is literally what they're talking about. This is the kind of ridiculousness we get from desperate people trying to cover up their crimes. Now, what they're really saying is these don't cause cancer, despite the fact that literally has been, I could pull up 10 studies probably right now. The one I'm going to grab is this one because it's a great overview. Swiss Policy Research about COVID vaccines and cancer that talks about, and it has studies all over it. The point is, it has been shown that up to 50% of people that take the COVID injection get what they induce a temporary immune suppression, or what's called lymphocytopenia, which dramatically, first of all, if you have some level of cancer, even if it's very small, you don't even know it's there, this will cause it to explode. And on top of that, it will create a circumstance in your body that will be more susceptible to those things. Gee, like that doesn't connect. I wonder why we're having an explosion of cancers and every other problem that they want to pretend isn't there. But they said it's fake news. Not that it's happening, but that doesn't cause cancer. So their answer is the COVID vaccine doesn't do it. So who cares why it's happening? Let's look otherwhere. Like, that's the idea of Scotland saying, we see a neonatal issue, but we won't investigate because of vaccine hesitancy. So you don't care that you're murdering children or that children are dying as long as it's not the vaccine? Wasn't that alarming? Crazy. Now, Thomas Massey, and again, all of this, by the way, whichever direction we're talking about, self-spreading to transgenic edibles. The idea is that this is coming in every possible direction right now. And we've talked about this a long time ago, actually. I forgot to grab this. There we go. Beautiful. Pops right up. Thomas Massey said this on September 26th. We already talked about it. And he cites an older article, by the way, Grow and Eat Your Own Vaccines. This is from a research, or I think it was a college, actually. Yeah, it's from news.ucr.edu. And it's a real conversation, and it shouldn't be that shocking. It's been talked about for a long time. Grow and eat vaccines and food. And yet right now, people act like it's so crazy. Fake news. He says the government is using your tax dollars to fund research into transgenic edible plant vaccines. Within the next 24 hours, Congress will vote on an amendment that would defund these projects that was put forward by Massey. He did put it forward. They did vote on it, and they did remove it. And then they voted unanimously, or they removed it, but then they left out the amendment from the bill. Now, how does that even possibly make sense? How is that legal? Well, nothing they do is legal. So essentially, they voted on this. They just cut it out. So that means there is funding for edible vaccines. That's the point. Your taxpayer dollars will now be funding edible plant vaccines. This was on March 4th. We already briefly talked about this. My point is how wild it is that they can go through this process and your supposed democracy works. And then they go, well, we don't like that, so we'll just cut it out. Oh, democracy. Got it. I mean, how embarrassing, right? Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Great job, Twitter. Oh, maybe you don't want us to look at it. Maybe is that what's going on? Wow. My God. In any case, this has been talked about for a long time. I wrote this article back in 2015, long before I was even doing the show the way I was. Damn, I mean, cannabis may already be genetically modified. And I talk about this going back to a group called Prairie Plant Systems, which might not even exist anymore for all I know. The point was they won a contract all the way back then from Canada to produce medical marijuana. My concern at the time was that when you looked into the group, what were they trying to do? Well, they were literally trying to create exactly what we're talking about now. They were trying to find ways to take plants and fulfill specific needs, most currently plant-based pharmaceuticals, vaccines, antidepressants, all of it. So I was worried, and I'm worried still, that they put that stuff in cannabis. It's very clear. I mean, why would you pick a group that was their only focus at the time? You know, it's very weird to me. My point, though, is this is not a new topic. Definitely not a fake topic. Defender talked about it on the 7th. Same taxpayers could end up funding research, in which we are now, under a $460 billion spend. Now, I'm actually going to skip this for time, but read the article. That's a good article. Now, here's how this gets played online. For those that are swayed by this, faceless screamers online that might say that you're crazy. Somebody asked on Quora, which I hate this platform just because it's just not, actually I shouldn't say that. Sometimes there's important things on here because you get different perspectives, but it says, could American taxpayers end up funding research on edible mRNA vaccines under the Omnibus bill? That's what it was. Saying, it says, excuse me, I should have just finished it. $460 billion spending bill in which all of our food will be contaminated with COVID vaccines and more. Now, I wish that last part makes it harder to answer because the question should be just, is this happening? Not what you then think it will cause, because that's where people are going to try to conflate it. But this is what the answer was. And in many cases, by the way, it says a couple of things. One, you're really effing gullible. Two, you're really effing stupid. Yeah, really, really productive. Unsurprisingly to the rest of us, these two things are closely related. He says, you are quite obviously and intentionally a stupid anti-vaxxer. And most of those that complain about nefarious going-ons with mRNA vaccines while knowing precisely nothing about them. That's his answer. mRNA vaccines are inherently unstable because mRNA is inherently unstable. At room temperature, it begins to break down. His point is, first of all, that can't happen in food, which, by the way, I made the argument before. I'm not saying that we know for sure that that's happening right now, but if they're finding a way to make it stable inside of an injection, which is the same kind of point, why wouldn't we ask whether that's something they're working on? Which, by the way, they literally are. That is part of what's going on. It's not a secret. In fact, I'll just show you right now. This is in Tennessee. This is from yesterday. Quote, vaccine lettuce bill, which is what it's called, or at least the kind of general name, aiming to classify food containing a vaccine as a drug, passes in Tennessee. Now, if you read this, you watch it, this is a debate about what is real. The idea that they already have this in place, and the idea is that they want a bill in place so they can deem one of those things a vaccine or a drug instead of food. And yet we're over here, these people are over here debating whether that's even real or the idea that it's even possible while it's already going on. That's how dumb this is. Now, I'm not saying it's in every possible food product. I wouldn't argue that. I don't know that for sure. Or, like I've said before, that it's even possible to translate it through the food. But my point is, if they're sure as hell trying to do that, then why wouldn't we ask whether they found a way to complete that? Like, realize it's not a secret. They are actively doing this to the point to where Massey and the rest of them are standing up and telling you this. And that's what the transgenic that's what this means, guys. Where was it? Here we go. So it's important to see that people get gaslit on these platforms, even though they're asking a real question, which you can prove is already happening. Thank God Tennessee stood up to this, which I think is fantastic, which I doubt they're going to care about it. People that do these things don't care about the laws anyway. Also, don't forget, while this is happening, we just talked about this. Shout out to Josh Walkos for breaking this story as far as I could tell. They changed the informed consent, which to very little fanfare. In fact, zero from the corporate media, because, we know how much they care about our rights, clearly. How pathetic. Well, we talked about it on this show from January 25th, 2024. Dissolution of informed consent. Zionism is racism, and Israel loses control of October 7th narrative. Yep, told you. First week, or actually on the first week, we were saying they had lost control of the information war, which I also still stand by. And I still agree then. And right to this day, they've lost this, guys. But point is, the dissolution of informed consent. Read this for yourself. It says very clearly, this final rule allows an exception from the requirement to obtain informed consent. And this is where they get to decide when a clinical investigation poses no more risk than minimal risk. Oh, I see. Which is, by the way, what they said about the COVID-19 injection. An experimental gene therapy that's killing people all over the world. But they decide it was okay, it's safe and effective. So they're arguing if they say the same thing next time, that they can just remove informed consent. Right. That means they don't have to tell you. That means it could end up in your food. Like, I don't know why we can't recognize how clear that possibility is. Not to say that we know for sure, but it's right in front of you. Now, one quick point that I think is hilarious. I was reading through the omnibus bill, and I just wanted to show you this, that I think this, and it's one of those things that just gets quietly continued, and nobody seems to talk about it, despite the fact that it's one of the most widely understood topics now. I mean, even in contrast to federal government stance, specifically hemp. I mean, I've talked about this for so long, and you still get these ridiculous people like Alex Bernenson out there still trying to pretend, by the way, still trusting all the people who he's pretending, or who he's telling you are lying to you about all these other medical things, are the same people still lying about cannabis. But weirdly, he can't connect those dots. The point is, they still, in the recent omnibus bill from 2024, have this. None of the funds made available by this act, and it's in regard to the farm part, the agricultural part of it, may be available by this act or any other act may be used in contravention of Section 7606 of the Agricultural Act to prohibit the transportation, processing, sale, or use of hemp, not cannabis, or specifically weed or marijuana, because cannabis is the general term, because both hemp and marijuana are considered cannabis, but hemp specifically. The non-psychoactive version of this that doesn't get people high, but in fact can make far better, longer lasting, more efficacious medicines, textiles, food, walls, concrete. I mean, my God, it's like so, and it is, guys, if you really understand and do the due diligence on it, better, longer lasting, better for the planet. It's just crazy. well, gee, I wonder why they're not letting us use it, because it completely contradicts like every major industry, I mean, oil, concrete, I mean, everything, even wood, guys. Timber, which, by the way, going back to the Hearst family, is one of the key parts of how this whole thing started. Bottom line, they're telling you you're not allowed to use any of this money, even if they give it to you for your purposes for farming, to do anything around hemp. It says that is grown or cultivated in accordance with Section 7606 of the Agricultural Act. Basically, it says within or without the United States, I thought it said something else, within or outside the state in which the hemp is grown or cultivated. Bottom line is that the military still has some weird purposes. They like going back even further, by the way, they used to make their sails with hemp, their rope with hemp in the Navy, and then just on a dime, just turned away from this. And I think it just shows you there's a clear political overlap. And to this day, the vast majority of countries have allowed some kind of medical purpose, many of them recreational, including DC for F's sake. And yet here we are. Why do you think that possibly makes sense? Why don't we talk about this, even though most Americans clearly disagree with this? Because it's not a pretend democracy. We don't live in this fantasy world. We live in a world where powerful people in oligarchies, in what's the word I just saw I loved, by the way? I forget. There's a new word I saw that I appreciated in the context of that same thing. But an authoritarian government. That's what we live in, that pretends they're doing what is right for you. And I'll include the article I recently put up on a Substack, The Cannabis Deception, How Your Government Stole Your Future. I think it's important to understand how seriously obvious this really is. That messed it up. Let me see. Oh, that's right. The stupid Substack thing. Anyway, I'll come back to that. Now, on that last note, I want to include this same point. We were just talking about the mRNA vaccines, right? Here's the people's voice. USDA caught pumping mRNA vaccines into all organic produce across the country. This is my point, guys. Now, you could, I mean, if you just said caught pumping mRNA vaccines into food, I wouldn't disagree with that, because you could prove to some degree that I think that's how. I mean, I would still probably take an issue with that. I don't think it's where the mRNA aspect of it, I think, is still kind of up in the air of what translates. But I know they're trying. That's my point. But I would still go along with the point. I'd say, well, give them a pass. This is a purposeful deception. So you have to ask why. It's the same thing like last time. There's nothing in there that says that they're pumping it into every single organic food across the entire country. It says the exact opposite, in fact. But it says the Alliance for Natural Health claims the USDA and other organic certifiers are allowing mRNA vaccines to infiltrate organic food. Well, okay, so how do you take that statement and turn that into all organic food across the whole country? And it seems deliberately opaque and subjective. And I genuinely think that's what this is. It says, according to the Organic Eye, an industry watchdog, USDA certified organic producers all across America are using mRNA. And I've proven to some cases, I haven't proven every single one of them, but I've proven in some cases it is happening in their livestock. That's not all food, that's livestock, even though it goes against the principles of organic farming. It says the watchdog also pointed out that consumers cannot determine whether these USDA certified organic meats, eggs, or milk have been produced using these. So that statement right there indicates that some don't have it. And yet you still said all organic produce. You didn't even say, I mean, the point was it's about livestock and you make it about produce. I mean, anyway, the point is, read this for yourself. I just want people to be careful. There's a lot of this going on. And the same kind of point goes for this. This person's name is Jim Ferguson, who I don't think is a good person to follow, says, breaking news, Japan bans mRNA COVID shots, which didn't happen. Not even at all. And I think, and this is Swan Creek says, there are community notes stating it's not true, which that's not, I don't see those. That's not why I think it's, I didn't even notice that. But anyway, that's not why I don't think it is. If you look into it, you can tell for yourself. But it says, coming from a supposed esteemed person as you with 202,000 followers, I found it hard to believe you would post lies. Can you please produce the proof that Japan has indeed banned these shots? And there's nothing. He didn't post any follow-up. Right? There's nothing. And it's not because these people said it not because these people said it as well. It's because you can look in for yourself and find that there is no indication from Japan, anything, that happened. But it says the Japanese government will never abandon mRNA vaccine platform. On the contrary, a replicon vaccine are already in the works, which it is, by the way. You can look into for yourself. Or Cat A says, I've checked this story with Japan sources connected with the the Stop the Shots movement, and it's not true. It's being reported by it's not being reported by any of the Japanese journalists I follow, and blah, blah, blah. And that shouldn't prove it for you either. You should check and make sure that you're not missing something, right? But the point is, it's not true. To the best of my effort, yeah, I mean, here's Aussie 17. Jim, this story is not true. Now, my point is, they could have made a mistake, but in my experience, this is the kind of stuff that comes from this account. And so just be careful, because these are huge accounts that are very clearly working their way to the top of some perceived independent media, which I see as the mainstream independent media, perception. And I'm worried about that. So on that note, let's talk about where are we? Way too long, damn it. Let's talk about some bots. This will bring us into the conversation of Israel, and we'll see how much we get into. I'm definitely going to talk about the main point that we part of the title. But I found this really interesting. Now, I'm not going to say I know this for sure. This is a thought exercise. But I want you guys to look this. And I think first of all, I don't think anybody out there with a brain is actually going to argue that there are no bots. I think everybody thinks that. They just think the other side's doing it. But the point is true that there are bots. There are entire groups like Israel has a public campaign. Hasbara is the name for what they do. But the point is they have entire rooms they've even proudly discussed and shown images of, where you've got only people on the IDF on computers all just sitting there trolling all day long. Or what they would say is spreading truth about Israel. But the same point, right? They're trying to influence their perception on the people online. You're not going, hey, I'm from the IDF. Here's what I think. You're Joe from the corner saying, hey, I disagree with I love the IDF because they're the honest ones. It's the same kind of stuff. The US does it. Every country in the world does it. So from that perspective, I think we're seeing an overwhelming, obvious nature on Twitter in particular, an overwhelming example of how this is influencing the conversation. Here's a person joined 2021. Of course, it's just bold advocacy, of course. And it's this lawyer, hers mom. I just personally just kind of find that to be a little bit static and clumsy, like it's like a cutout. But, who knows? Not very many followers and so on. But if you look, and I mean, you go on to the very bottom, which only goes back to 2023, I think, even though they started in 2021, which I'll show you. Every single post is from like 7 or 8 specific accounts that you might expect. All the ones we talk about, all of them, all the same people, all the Elon Levies and the Glick, and we've talked about all of them, even Imshin, and we've talked about him as well. Because what do? If you look through their accounts, non-stop, incessant, constant Israeli propaganda, most of which you could prove are lies. But that wouldn't even prove it. Maybe they're just very pro-Israel, right? This is what I thought was really telling. I went back. They started their account in 2021. So I did a specific search on Twitter to find out what they were posting in 2021. Turns out it was literally nothing. I said, okay, well, maybe they just started it like a lot of people do and put it aside and didn't use it, which can happen. Well, here is 2022 to 2023. Nothing. Really? So you start an account in 2021, don't say a word about anything, and right up until October 10th. This is the one before it. This is up until October 6th, 2023. Nothing. Still nothing. Not a peep. Interestingly enough, right at October 10th is when she starts to post things. Or technically, it was the 23rd. The 10th is the starting point I had in here. So that was stuck in my head. After October 7th. So you guys tell me what you think. I just find that to be really strange. And if you look at what they're actually saying, look at where it started. So not a single post on this entire platform for 2 years. And in the month after October 7th, these are the 2 things that were said. First, October 23rd, underneath the Wall Street Journal. Oh, look, interestingly, highlighting this story that turned out to be full of lots of false narratives that we now can prove. It said, please allow everyone, not only the Wall Street Journal subscriptions, to read this article. It's so important. People need to know. That's the first thing you come on this platform to do. And Meghan McCain, please listen to me. Keep checking on your Jewish friends. They're not okay. Thank you for knowing this. No indication of any it's just a very strange, very obvious thing to me. Now, you guys decide for yourself, but I definitely think that this is a bot. I think this is, and it's my opinion, but I think this is an example of a bot, it doesn't exist anywhere. This is a computer somewhere that was a random account that's meant to tap into a very Western mindset very clearly and influence people in very obvious directions. And if you look at what they're talking about today, it's exactly what everything. Fake audio recordings that have been debunked left and right by everybody but the Israeli government. claims of all sorts of all things like food everywhere in the Gaza Strip, all the stuff we're talking about that we will again today prove are lies. So just be watchful for stuff like that. Not all of them I think are as that obvious. Even I could be wrong, of course. Now let's talk about a couple of different important things here. And this one is in regard to, I think that, this was, I remember I moved these around. I forgot I kind of changed up the order today to see, usually I try to start with things I think are more important versus the ones that will take longer. And then I took a super long time on the opening today, but let's get into, the food aid issues. We're going to end, if we have time, with some of the deeper points about, which we'll get into either way, the Palestinian Authority, the shifting of the government, and a kind of a deep-seated manipulation that seems to be being played on the Palestinian people on top of everything else. But Mike Pompeo said this yesterday. Under the Biden administration, we have not proven to be a reliable ally to our friends, and our adversaries have noticed. What an interesting thing to say. I continue to evaluate all of these statements through the lens that they must know that everybody, let's be very objective, they must know that a huge portion of the world is very aware of what's going on. And that's what they're so desperately propagandizing. I mean, I haven't seen Mike Pompeo tweet this much in years. And even there, hey, somebody's poking him going, tweet for Israel. And okay, either way, it's an odd thing to do at a time when most people are going to read this and be like, you're disgusting. Not reliable to your friends are murdering children. Right, so it's an interesting thing. So again, doing things that I think they know at some level will hurt their reputation, but for help Israel. Now, maybe they're just that pro-Israel, or maybe there's something else going on. Here's what I said. If your, quote, friends are gleefully starving children to death while bombing them, maybe you should reevaluate such friends. If your, quote, adversaries oppose such self-evident atrocities, maybe you should reevaluate your adversaries. Truth is, we all know you yourselves are the villains. That's the truth. These are the villains we're looking at. Doesn't mean everybody else is a good guy. What it means is these people are the ones actively trying to maintain one of the most obvious, horrific events in everyone's life right now, in living memory for most people. How do you not see that as a villain? Now, food aid in general, as they're literally starving everybody in the area, and every group that means anything in this conversation is unequivocally stating it's not just happening, but it's the worst it's ever been. Almost anywhere. Level 5, catastrophic, famine, dying every day. Elon Levy, the guy that got fired for lying about food aid, comes out and says, why is Facebook censoring criticism of Hamas and UNRWA? Which, by the way, I honestly don't even know, because I know they've been very aggressively one-sided, and I think we can easily prove that. I mean, maybe they asked for this. Who ultimately knows? But here's what's hilarious to me. It says, he wrote, Hamas is hijacking aid and UNRWA is covering it up, which is a lie. But they censored it. And it says, it looks like you shared or sent something that attacks a person or a group of people based on who they are, which I think is hilarious, because that is what he's doing. But I don't want him to be censored for it. He should be able to say whatever he wants, but he is lying. But Adam says, because you are lying, which is hilarious. There's a lot of people down there saying that. But what I think is funny about it is he's going, Facebook, you're not supposed to censor me if it's real. And his point is that you're saying something that every government, even your allies, have come out and be like, well, we were with you for a minute when you made the claim, because that's what usually we do. We blindly take your side before we have any evidence, but then you never followed up. You've never produced anything other than your word, other than statements, other than pictures of people, other people that have been tortured while they were arrested, which have turned out to be false, which we'll get into again today. There's been nothing. And they have all said that. This will be the easiest one, I think. Yep. Canadian officials still haven't seen intelligence linking UNRWA to Hamas. And in Canada, it's usually way more pliable and just kind of like meek to these kind of situations than in the US is. So for them to come out and say that, it just shows you that they, for whatever reason, they feel it's so obvious that they have to stand back on it. But he's just tripling down on that. Now, I'll include this, by the way. Israeli spokesman suspended after caught lying about food aid. And yet here he is, just pushing in further. But here's the important point. And I've been waiting for this, because somebody reached out to me. I wanted to make sure I saw this specifically so I could show it to you. Elon Levy says, and this is from the 29th, he first said, Israel has facilitated the delivery of over 46 million meals to Gaza, which I don't even know what that means. You're just watering it, meals. So what does that amount to? 1 truck? 2? I mean, it's just this game of playing. Like, you realize you're talking about large boxes full of hundreds of meals, a huge, gigantic truck full. And I don't know. I don't know what it amounts to. What I can prove to you is that even what they're telling us they put in is dramatically less than any other time before October 7th. Or I shouldn't say that. The time before October 7th, leading up to it, they were already food insecure. And they're delivering less today. Even the UN says, despite Elon Levy pointing to the UN and saying, they say they don't. Their number, he's lying about that. And I'll prove it to you. But he says UNRWA is actually undercounting trucks. But for those inclined to believe what UNRWA is saying, UNRWA is contradicting itself to sell you a myth about famine, a myth. And this is where they go afoul, because Elon Levy has been one of the worst at this. And he really is one of the worst in this, even though he thinks he's really smart. They come out and they say something that, and this is why he got fired, actually, because he didn't know his place. And he came out and said, "You're wrong, David Cameron," and made it like a pithy, snide kind of response to it. Like, if you look for yourself, there's plenty, there's actually an excess. And they got him fired. I don't think they care about human aid. I think they got embarrassed because he thought he could speak over a leading member of the UK Parliament. The bottom line is he's a small person in this discussion, and he got drunk on power, I think. In either case, it came down to lying about aid. David Cameron said we needed more aid. He said, no, you don't. They said, you're fired. So it's pretty clear. But the point is, myth about famine. So your argument is there is no famine. So your argument is that the food's going in, and it's even getting to people. But somehow they're undercounting. So this argument is clearly saying the food's going in, and it's getting to people. They're just lying about the amount of trucks. Am I wrong about that? My point in saying the first thing I said is because this is him saying a narrative that contradicts almost every other thing people are saying, even in their government, even in their propaganda narrative, because he's just trying to make this point right now. No foresight, very short-sighted. Then you've got Colonel Peter Lerner, same day, saying, when the UN says there is famine, starvation, and suffering, ask them why aren't they distributing the food supplies in Gaza? If the situation is so dire, why are they stockpiling aid? Okay, wait a minute. He just said the famine was a myth. He said that they are delivering it, and that it's because they're undercounting the trucks. So here you are saying they're stockpiling the aid, and the situation is dire. The whole point is it doesn't add up, right? Come on, you stupid thing. Geez, it wouldn't zoom back out. Now it says, Ambassador, this person says, I dare, and skip what she writes in general. This is basically what they're trying to point out. They're trying to show you these arbitrary graphs that aren't cited back to the UN to say, this is what they said. It's not. Now, you don't have to trust Middle East Monitor. This is a public statement that we've already discussed specifically, and yes, from somebody from UNRWA. But remember, they've never proven this other than arbitrary statements, and most of the people that they claimed were arrested for this were later released or killed. No evidence was ever presented other than a few provably false audio recordings. The point is, Abu Hamza, not the one they claim they killed, it's a different name. It was, the first name is different. He says, this guy's name is Adan Abu Hamza. He noted that the volume of humanitarian aid entering the Rafah crossing is only 5% of the volume that entered before October 7th. It's pretty simple. And now you're getting contradictory statements from one saying that, this is the game that's been played. Either it is Hamas stealing it all, and that's why they're starving, or they're lying about it and they're not starving. I mean, how do we all not see that? Both arguments are made. It's oscillating back and forth almost every other day. And you can look through Elon's own account and see how he keeps doing that. And yet they just don't care. I mean, that must be, they must be worried, at least to some degree, about going to prison. I don't know how they can't. Now, this point I've made plenty of times. I'm going to quickly just make this clear to you again, just for those that haven't seen it, to highlight the fact that this is a provable example of Kogat, the group he's citing here to make this claim, lying about having too much food. This is the same group they keep pointing at. Like Elon will point at them and say, see, we're delivering more food than ever. Well, they said 20 bakeries are operational in Gaza Strip at a time. Oh, look at that. Remember how many, those that have watched this many times, they even got the red thing they had down there removed. It said warning. And they've got even that removed. That's not by accident, guys. There is a clear effort from Zionist manipulators on this platform to get what they want. And I'll prove it to you next. My point, though, is that you can already see it over here on Oren Barkskis, using the same information with the same fake date, also citing it back to Kogat, which weird. Look. Oh, wait, hold on. Are those different posts? I hope they're not, because that would be perfect. No, they are. Okay. But okay, nonetheless, then that's what I thought. I thought this was removed. This is what I was talking about right here for the podcast. Stay informed. The media is presented out of context. Now, again, even that's a very watered down way of saying what this real fact check said over here, which don't trust it because they said, but because it's the truth, which is food shortages in Gaza are widely documented, with some people resorting to eating animal feed. And the point is, the bakery that you're showing in this video was destroyed in October. This was posted in February. And I've shown you all this many times. This is this Oren Barksy guy who I don't know who it is, just simply saying, there is no famine in Gaza. Look at all the bread. It's an old image from an old bakery that's now been destroyed. And the point was, that's Kogat who posted that, who they took it from. And then Elon Levy took the same thing from Kogat and posted it himself. Said this, just repeated the same thing. There are 20 bakeries. He's lying. We know that they're lying. And let's get into that, because I'll show you there's a lot of examples of this where Kogat has come out and said, here's all Nusra markets and all the overflowing food everywhere. You jump ahead. I kind of organized this poorly, actually, now that I realize the point I wanted to make before I go to this video. So this was one that we've already shown you. Market scenes in Nusrat, which, by the way, I'll come back to. It's very weird. This doesn't pop up unless you get an exact search, which is not how it's supposed to work. I search for here with just market, and it just doesn't come up, which I actually think is a reason for that. Let me show you this great video that somebody sent me. She didn't want me to say who she was. We already briefly mentioned this. Now here is proof. Metadata proof showing that Kogat knowingly posted a picture that was from 2014. So on this, she'll go into this, inspect, going to open the source code on the actual image, and goes through and basically goes to the part about the image itself and scrolls down and shows you where it was created. Which, by the way, that's, if you guys know, that's how everything online, images and so on, there's all the metadata has all this stuff stored in it. Coming up right here, and you'll see it highlighted with the image. Come on, it's coming. Oh, that's it right there. Oops, went too far. So this is just scrolling through the page profile information, and it says 2014 created. I think that's important to understand, because we've proven this. These images are not what happened. Let's go through it, actually prove them to you in another way. The reality being, beside the fact that they've lied about this and the bakery itself has been destroyed, here is a scene from Nusrat Market, not the actual bakery, which has been destroyed, but the market. They say today, December 21st. They keep doing this. Well, here's another shot from January 8th, showing you the entire destroyed complex. Or February 20, technically the point being here is that this is February or January 8th. This is the one where they claim they killed the one person. It was 400 people they claim they killed for the one commander they said they got, which, as far as I could tell, turned out not to be there. That's the entire Nusrat camp. Not every aspect of it, but this is the area we're talking about right here. This is the Nusrat refugee camp that was bombed. Here they're claiming the market in Nusrat, February 28th. Guys, this whole thing has been destroyed. And on top of that, this is what I did. I got mixed up on this. So the point here was this was December 21st. Well, here's October 24th. Show the very area they're pointing to. Already bombed, already being destroyed, already driving people away from the area. That's the other point to remember, guys, is they drove people away from this area. They drove them away, and they said if you left, you were going to get killed. You're working with Hamas. And so now and this goes all the way into today. They're posting things on March saying, oh, everything's going well. There's no food everywhere. The point was to go through the time frame and show you, okay, well, there's a shot before it. Same thing, January 8th. Here's February 28th. Right? So not a month later, you're telling me it's this bustling market. Same thing, March 3rd, March 19th. Well, here is March 5th. Does that look like the place where a market is being held? Fire that broke out in Nusrat Market. It's widely reported. That's the very market we're talking about. So this was on March 5th. Here they're posting this on March 18th. And again, this is the image that is old and we can prove it. Gosh darn it. Why is this doing this? There we go. And Israel did the same thing. Market scenes, March 18th. Well, March 5th, it was destroyed. Even before that, it was destroyed. They bombed it more than once. And on top of that, we already have this. Here's the actual bakery they keep claiming are making bread in February or even later. October 26th. Let humanitarian aid in. They let it in. Then they bombed it so that Gaza would starve. They've done that the entire time. Here's the Associated Press. Israel is holding up food for 1.1 million Palestinians in Gaza, the main UN agency says there. Famine is setting in. UN court orders Israel to unblock food aid. So it's transparently obvious that they're blocking all of this. The point is to remember that they're knowingly lying about this stuff. So going back to the same point, when they're pretending this is happening and desperately lying about it and trying to shout you down from seeing it and then contradicting themselves to make one point, or here's why UNRWA's stealing it. Oh, wait, no, it's not a famine, because they want both points at the same time. And I guess they don't care that, or rather think you're not smart enough to see how contradictory that is. They're wrong. This one is the World Court orders Israel to unblock Gaza food aid. Just left and right, but they're all lying. Here's Elon Levy. He says, this is how lies, damned lies, and statistics feed cooked up allegations on starvation. Can you just imagine I can't even understand that. And he's getting way, way less engagement at this point. I think that's because most people are like, really? Like even his supporters. First of all, most of them probably respect the Washington Post, which I don't know why anybody would. But secondly, that what you're doing is you're highlighting something that everybody knows. This is my point. If you're saying allegations of starvation, you yourself said moments ago that Hamas was stealing the aid. Are you arguing they're stealing it, but then giving it to the people? That wouldn't be stealing it. Otherwise, that means that they're not getting aid. So why would you put starvation in quotes? You see how easy that is? This deductive logic, because they're lying about everything. But he goes through this post, which, by the way, I do think was well done. Despite, I don't think it's because Washington Post cares about you. The truth is very obvious. Not only are they destroying all the food and every aid truck, not letting it in, bombing the crossings, destroying all the roads, they're also destroying every piece of farmland. They're dropping white phosphorus in areas so they won't be able to grow back. They discuss it in the article. They are literally destroying everything they can to stop this from happening. And his argument? They're lying. They're racist. I mean, that's really what's happening. False. Again, based on UN figure. Dude, everybody disagrees with you. The UN says you're wrong. The Washington Post did an entire breakdown showing you're wrong. And all you can do is go, you're lying. And probably someone there insinuates that they hate Jewish people. I'm willing to bet you my life. Here's Senator John Fetterman telling you the truth, because I don't think he's smart enough to realize he's doing that. He says, no conditions, zero hypocrisy, stand with Israel. What's the Post say? Accusations of hypocrisy follow U.S. arms transfer to Israel. It's like he couldn't have picked a dumber thing to say right there. So accusations of hypocrisy follow U.S. arms transfer to Israel. Why? Because it explicitly violates domestic and international law, because they're blocking food aid, right? And they're violating international law. Right. So either it's clearly not allowed to be delivered to people who are committing war crimes. And U.S. law says you're not allowed to help people or fund them or give weapons to people that are blocking food aid. Or it might be vice versa. Whatever. The point is they're violating both. And he says no conditions. That's the quiet part out loud, bud. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say, no, we care about humanity. No conditions means we don't care what they do. We don't care who they kill. We support them, which is pretty much what has been said many ways. But you're not supposed to say it out loud as a U.S. politician. But I said, wow, I, for one, am glad that the Zionists decided to lean into this incompetent politician, seeing as how he just keeps stepping in it, thinking that he's, quote, being strong for Israel. No, sorry, pal, you're just being clumsy. Saying openly no conditions just makes our point. And here, Suppressed Voice writes, United States authorizes the transfer of more bombs, warplanes, and billions of dollars for Israel, after acting like he was waffling on it, and then goes even harder. Again, how do you not see that as compromised? How is it possible, as much as we know about politics and politicians, at least we think we do, that these people would just blow up their entire career to keep doing this? Maybe that's indicative of the point that I keep saying, that it doesn't matter what we vote for and they don't care, but it still is knowing that they're allowing us to see through the illusion that they need to keep control of us. However you look at it, this is crazy. It makes me think that they really do have something on these people, which Epstein conversation, it shouldn't be that shocking to people, guys. The sexual blackmail network was not one person with one group of girls. That was one asset in a massive black market CIA Mossad conversation, which that's not even hyperbolic. Acosta admitted that, but let's pretend it's fake news. In recent days, the Biden administration has allowed billions of dollars to be supplied to Israel with bombs and fighter aircraft. The new package includes 1,800 MK-84 bombs. So there, he just guaranteed more genocide, more murder. He guaranteed that Rafah would be invaded. Thanks, Biden. Or Trump would do the same thing if you don't think that. Mark, wait. I kind of think he's going to get elected again, and we're going to see the same thing, I bet. Sadly enough, I hope I'm wrong. State Department allowed the transfer of 25 F-35A aircraft, which, what's that, like $30 billion? And engines worth $2.5 billion to Israel. Oh, wait, that can't be right. 25 F-35As? That can't be worth only $2.5 billion. Maybe I'm wrong. But it says the bombs and fighter jets transferred to Israel were approved by Congress years ago. But that doesn't matter. They're trying to kind of circumvent the current legalities by pretending like we already agreed on that. That doesn't matter. You don't get it doesn't, so a criminal can't be like, well, we discussed it yesterday, so I didn't break the law today, did I? No, that's not how that works. You break the law because they did, and then suddenly those become illegal. But these people are criminals. They don't care what you think or what the law is. That's the obvious reality. Now, the world has reacted to the UN Security Council resolution, the legally binding one, as far as I understand it, based on everybody but the US and Israel, demanding the ceasefire, which we saw March 25th, right? Now, here's Sam Husseini on March 27th, asking very specifically, does the U.S. support the call for, first of all, the ceasefire? He talks about the Geneva Conventions in general, but asks him specifically about the General Assembly and the Uniting for Peace resolution. And I find this really insightful. So let's take a look at what he has to say here. And by the way, if you're not following Sam, I recommend you do. He's doing excellent work.
Francis Boyle, who successfully represented Bosnia and Herzegovina at the International Criminal Court, as well as Craig Mokhiber, a former UN official who resigned in protest, given the ICJ orders against Israel and given the UN resolution this last week that demanded an immediate ceasefire, are arguing that what is needed now is a uniting for peace procedure at the General Assembly. They are saying that with that procedure, the General Assembly can effectively take control of the situation to some extent, given the deadlock at the Security Council, suspend Israel from participation at the General Assembly, admit Palestine as a member, urge economic sanctions against Israel, and set up a tribunal as the UN did for Rwanda and Yugoslavia. What would the U.S. do if the General Assembly did that?
So I would say, first of all, I would reject the premise that there is deadlock at the UN Security Council. We just saw the UN Security Council pass a resolution this week on this very question. And respect to,
demanded a ceasefire.
Just with respect to any effort at the General Assembly.
In case you missed what he's trying to say, what I think anyway is that the argument is that, well, they voted for it. Israel doesn't care. They're not actually initiating a ceasefire. So that is still a deadlock. Despite the fact that every legal mechanism is saying they're supposed to, they don't care. So what are we going to do about it? Typical U.S. meek response, we'll raise the issue. Well, we stressed that they need to follow the law, but they're not. It's 5 months ago. How long can you pretend like you keep stressing that they need to do what they're not doing? It's just cowardly. And they must know that by now. 5 months of saying we're raising the issue is pretty stupid.
To expel Israel? No, obviously that's not. With respect to any effort at the General Assembly to expel Israel? No, obviously that's
not to expel, it's to suspend.
To suspend Israel, it's not something that we would support.
All right, so it doesn't matter what they do. Who cares? You can't suspend Israel. You can't investigate Israel. John Bolton threatens the families of the ICC if you dare to investigate any U.S. ally. It's the same kind of mindset, guys. It just doesn't matter. They are completely above the law in their own minds. But that's something we're trying to change.
Ultimately, we believe that the resolution to this conflict is something that can be done through direct negotiations, which is what we have pursuing to see.
For the podcast, he's reiterating the question, which I love the way they do this now. Now, I'm not. This is decentered news, so good shout out to them for doing this. Is it we know this. If you watch the show or pay attention to any of this stuff, they never answer the question. They just give you the same old recycled points. Worse now than ever, because they know they're on a tightrope. So they just go right back to the same, well, we raised the issue, or we expressed that they need, they confirmed for us that they promised to follow international law, or whatever it is. How many times can you say that? So the question is, what would the U.S. do if the UN General Assembly invoked the Uniting for Peace against Israel? But his answer has nothing to do with that.
Effort at the General Assembly to expel Israel, to suspend Israel. It's not something that we would support. Ultimately, we believe that the resolution to this conflict is something that can be done through direct negotiations, which is what we have pursuing to achieve an immediate ceasefire that secures the release of hostages.
Such a liar. We know that's not true.
Humanitarian assistance to flow into the Palestinian people, and we would like to see that expanded, this initial ceasefire, into something.
Yeah, they'd like to see it expanded. Well, it's been 5 months. Are they? Right? I mean, it's the same point. Well, we've let them know that we need to see more going in every day for the last 5 months, and we're going to do it tomorrow too.
More durable and lasting, that ensures Hamas's defeat and establishes long-lasting, durable peace for Israel and the Palestinian people.
Thank you.
What about Islamic Jihad? Well, next time. Well, that'll be our next excuse to keep murdering them. So be quiet.
Thank you for the response, but just if I might,
it's just take one here and then
Thank you, Matt.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt.
That's going to be a point next. They hate Sam. Why? Because he's honest. Right? It just shows you how petty and small these people are. Their own little internal club, and you say the wrong things. Quite frankly, he hasn't been asked questions for a long time, months, guys. He's been there. They won't let him ask questions until recently. I'm wondering why they keep letting him stay there. I quite frankly think he's going to get kicked out, which it's not his fault. He's doing good work, and if he does, it only proves the point that they don't want honest journalism in there, which I think we all know. But the overall point, actually, hold on, was
something more.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate. So the point is, what would you do if that happened? Not that we wouldn't allow that or we wouldn't support it. Well, okay, you wouldn't support it, and then what? That's the question. What would you actually do if they did that? And they won't answer it because the real point is ultimately going to be nothing. You're not going to support it, but you're not going to do anything because you can't be seen as fighting the United Nations for Israel. I don't think they would go that far. Just like we see them already meekly walking back the statements of support, even though we know they still are, because they're trying to win some level of support from you. It's not working. But he says the State Department just says they wouldn't support the UN General Assembly. It doesn't say what they would do around that, but fails to answer the question. It says, the point I tried to make amid the crosstalk is that Israel is still bombing Gaza despite the resolution. That's what I was saying. Exactly. And nobody cares about that, it seems. That's why Uniting for Peace is needed. Obviously, he cut off my follow-up completely for a reason. It says, this is the first time they've taken any of his questions in months. They've often given other reporters several follow-ups while not allowing him to answer a single question or ask one. And it says here, here he is in late September, refusing to take a question from him about Biden's meeting with Netanyahu. Now, I don't know if this was the one that I was going to play next. Let me see. No, we're going to come back. Hold on. There's some, I don't want to go to, some of that I don't want to play just because I want to at least try to get done before 3 hours. And now the point is here, asking him, it says, the State Department spokesman Matt Miller repeatedly refuses to take questions from Sam Husseini about Biden's recent meeting, and he just ignores him, just skips over him over and over and over, like really transparently, right? Like Matt Lee tries to ask or tries to go, well, go ahead, take Sam. And he goes, no, you, Matt, you. And like, it's I don't even know the best word for it. Like, it's just not a good enough word in my mind. It's cowardly, right? And it's also just like I'm sure he feels very powerful when he does that. He shouldn't. It makes me mad that he gets to feel that way, quite frankly, because these are really weak people. They only have this little spot in power, and the bottom line is that they know you're doing the right thing. You're just asking the uncomfortable questions, which, I mean, your job is supposed to hide that stuff. They don't want you to know that. But like, the bottom line is at least make it like, again, it's as if it's fair playing field. Let people ask their questions. Just try to sidestep them. They're trying to cultivate a system in a room where there's no pressure, but it's the illusion of pressure. That's what this really is. And so these people don't get to ask questions. But he goes, he ended up interjecting several times during the presser days after October 7th. Being called on since Matt Miller has been ignoring him, he got a few questions in. Here's the back and forth.
That Israel ought to abide by international law. Does that, in your view, mean that Israel must end its cutoff of water, electricity, food, and medicine to the people in Gaza?
This one was important because this was on October. This was, October 10th. Okay. So this is crazy to me, not just to make Sam's point, but think about how long this has happened now. This is October 10th. You're going to hear the exact same arguments that he's giving today. 5-6 months later, the arguments are that they're in line with international law, that they've given us their assurances that they care and that we raised the issue. It's the same thing. It's just a better way to accentuate the same point that October 10th, you might have been able to get away with going, well, we're developing and we're seeing they have a right to defend themselves. But 6 months down the line, this is why everybody sees through it. And again, and Sam, by the way, Ericat here is one of the people, Saeed, excuse me, Sam, Jesus, Husseini, just getting the names confused in my head. And this is Saeed Ericat. And he's one of the people, by the way, I think does great work in this position. Here, listen to what he says and think about the timing.
That Israel ought to abide by international law. Does that, in your view, mean that Israel must end its cutoff of water, electricity, food, and medicine to the people in Gaza?
I will say that, as the president made clear, Israel has suffered from a brutal terrorist attack. Israel has the right to defend itself. It has the right to take action against the terrorists who launched this brutal attack and killed Israeli civilians. It killed American civilians, killed mothers and children. And
it's funny how they don't care to this very day about the American Palestinians or Palestinian Americans or Palestinian Britons that are being killed right now. Funny how that only matters in one direction, right? Quite frankly, that shows you they don't care about Americans. They just care about whatever political interests they have in the moment.
Babies and kidnapped children.
Nope. They lied about all that, by the way, and they were saying it.
And what's Israel doing?
So
I meant the kill babies part.
They are going to take action to respond to this terrorist attack and take action to secure their country, and we support them. As the president made clear, we always encourage all of our allies and partners to act in strict accordance with international law. That is what democracies do, and I would just point out that, of course, is not what Hamas did. Let me just finish. That is not what Hamas did in coming into Israel and kidnapping and murdering innocent civilians.
Okay, I understand. I mean, Hamas, you have Hamas listed as a terrorist organization. They don't get $4 billion a year from you. They don't have military aid and support and so on. So that is established. You're saying that Israel is a democracy. It's a country that abides by international law.
Which is provably false.
I'm asking you. The cutoff of water, electricity, food, and medicine is considered a war crime.
Yep.
Do you call on Israel to cease its effort now in cutting off medicine,
Let
water,
me start by saying that we are in the
And the real point there, guys, is this is what we were saying in the beginning, whether it was the collective punishment point or this. There's no argument that suddenly makes this not a war crime. That's why they lost this right in the beginning, because when they came in and said, cut it off, all of it, now that's collective punishment without question. Doesn't matter whether the argument is, well, Hamas will benefit from it. It doesn't change the law. And they knew that. They just don't care. And here's Matt Miller fumbling all over himself to try to not acknowledge that very obvious reality. They have a right to defend themselves. We raised the issue. It's the same stuff. They knew it. Gallant came out, or was it Gantz? Came out, I think whichever one of those two came out right in the beginning and was on TV and publicly said no food, no water, no medicine. There's just no way you hide that. And now we're 6 months down the line and it's still happening. Now, the food aid conversation is being forced through, but there's not been an ounce of fuel allowed through these points from October 7th. That's been proven and cited by the World Food Program and rather the UN in general. I've talked about it. The one thing we did see was COGAT pretending they brought some fuel to this one hospital, which was then challenged by the people in the hospital. They lied about that. Either way, the reason fuel stopped is because they don't have generator access, they don't have heating, they don't have anything. And one of the things early said in this was that without fuel, most of it doesn't matter anyway. They knew that. And this is always a game to this very point. Now they're dripping in small amounts to act like they're helping, which all that amounts to is truly torture. You are torturing people for your enjoyment, it seems, but quite frankly, from a political perspective, about removing them, ethnically cleansing them. and taking everything for yourself. And of course, I'm not talking about all Israelis are all Jews. I'm talking about the Israeli government, the Zionist platform.
Early days of Israel's response, Israel has a right to conduct an aggressive response, to respond to the terrorism that's been committed against its citizens.
Of course, everybody has a right to defend itself. That's a childish argument. We all know anybody anywhere in the world has a right to defend themselves. You don't get to say that and then hide the fact that in that process, he pulled out a gun and shot him in the head. Don't you? Well, what Matt said, he had a right to defend himself. So who cares what happened, right? Well, no, he had the right to defend himself, and then he went out and committed a crime. So that no longer applies. Pretty damn simple, isn't it? But this guy's really struggling with this whatever high-level math. I couldn't think of the right one.
We expect them to follow international law. We believe that they will, and we will remain in close contact with them about it.
You believe they should not intentionally target civilians. That's one. Second, do you have any idea on the number of Palestinians killed by Israel in the last 4 days?
I have seen public reports.
What are these?
I am not going to speak to Saeed, I'm going to speak to what the U.S. government can verify, which I've done with the number of U.S. citizens. I will let Israel speak to the number of Israeli citizens that have killed, as well as the number of Palestinians that have killed.
The 14 that the president spoke about are Palestinian Americans?
I don't have any degree whether they are Palestinian Americans, whether they're dual citizens. It ultimately doesn't matter to us. American citizens are.
I'm going to leave it there, but I want to make one quick point, though, just because I think this face he made is so funny to me. This face right here. When Matt starts talking. Right there. It's funny to me. And I've heard this from Sam and other people. Like, Matt Lee has a very specific placement there. And I think what he does is outstanding. I think he does a great job. But what's interesting is that he's got like this permanent seat, and like everybody stops for him. He always gets questions, which I think he deserves that. But what's funny is that this reverence, even from people like Matt, like you almost can tell that they're scared of him, or that I don't know. I can't really place what the emotion is, but it's funny to me that he's really aggressive and gruff with a lot of these people. But the moment Matt speaks up, he's like, ooh, super meek, and he pulls back. Just watch. I think it's hilarious.
Close contact with them about it.
You believe they should not intentionally target civilians. That's one. Second, do you have any idea on the number of Palestinians killed by Israel in the last 4 days?
I have seen public reports.
What are these?
I am not going to speak to Saeed, I'm going to speak to what the U.S. government can verify, which I've done with the number of U.S. citizens. I will let Israel speak to the number of Israeli citizens that have killed, as well as the number of Palestinians that have killed.
The 14 that the president spoke
so funny
about are Palestinian Americans?
He stops in his tracks and was like, "Oh, Matt, go ahead." I could be wrong. To me, I've watched so many of these that I pick up on stuff like that. I feel like he was in the middle of a sentence and he just pulled back, and even his facial, like his body language was very clearly passive to Matt. Go ahead, Matt. Even though he was shouting over Saeed, it just kills me how it's just interesting. And it just shows me these are followers. That guy's a follower. And we know that about this position. This isn't a leader of men. This is a guy who's lying to you to gaslight for genocide, not because he wants to do that, or maybe he does, but because he's being paid to do it. He's just a meek, small person in a lot of this, but there's a lot of people like that. Mercenaries, right? Just get paid to kill people. It's no different in my mind. Now, here is a Huffington Post article from May 19th. This is just making the point. I covered this. A lot of people covered it. A U.S. ambassador openly claimed Israel's abiding by international law. Which, by the way, they've basically said that. Matt has danced around that point enough to make an insinuation that, yes, they are. And they've even said that in many cases, right? The point is, they are actually making that argument. Even as we can see every single metric that provably violates that, including collective punishment. And I showed you this, by the way. This was the senior advisor, U.S. program for crisis group and so on. Ex-State Department. Says, I used to advise State Department on law, war assurances. If Ambassador Liu, who said this, buys these Israeli assurances, which why would you just buy their statements? Wouldn't you investigate to find out if you're worried about breaking the law? Yeah. But it says, I have a bridge they'll try to sell you, right? The point is you're ridiculous. And this person says, the U.S. ambassador says they are abiding by the law. And that's just somebody stating it. But the point is you can clearly, and this was the senior correspondent for Huffington Post. Actually just didn't, that was coincidence overlap. But there was a lot of coverage on this, myself included. So they walked it back, which I thought I had next. Oh, right here. Which is funny to me. U.S. attempts to clarify status of Israel's compliance with Biden's demands on international law. So they just try to water it down. After the U.S. said on Monday, Israel is not found to be in violation of international law, which we heard, the State Department, which is what their job is, or the White House briefings, the same thing. They stepped in and said, well, We have given no conclusive determination that has been made regarding Israel's compliance with international law. Oh, so will it be 9 months when you finish that, or 14? Let me know. Like, are we really pretending like 6 months into this, like you're still not conclusive in your determination? Is that the same ploy about how Matt claims you have to investigate every single bomb drop before you can make an assessment, despite the fact that Russia sneezed hard yesterday and so you scream sanctions? You guys are children. It's just so plainly contradictory. The bottom line is this was something that was a problem because they stepped a little bit too far in pro-Israel conversation. You can't say they're not in violation of international law when everyone in the world, including every metric of international law, is claiming they're violating it. So here is Sam Husseini calling this out. Well, specifically the Geneva Convention and the reality of the point about, I shouldn't say specifically, but broadly in the context of the Geneva Convention, because there's a lot of points in that, but in this one point in regard to the international law conversation and the way they can't answer this, the idea that the Geneva Conventions are clear, specifically the Fourth Geneva Convention we talk about in regard to armed rebellion, armed resistance, armed struggle. They don't want you to know about this stuff. But all this really amounts to is that they're almost now trying to water down their support for international law in general, or they're afraid to say that because that somehow makes Israel look bad and just shows the same point that I was making. Again, Sam doing good work here. Oh, this is actually just the quick one first, where he's asking him in response to a question that from him about the State Department recognizing the Geneva Conventions applied to the occupied territories. Hold on a second. Did I miss the other one? No, it was this one. Make sure I didn't have an extra one. So this one first, this really small one, where he just gets him to say yes.
I don't have any degree whether they are Palestinian Americans, whether they're dual citizens. It ultimately doesn't matter.
Wrong one. This one.
Yes or no as to whether or not the U.S. accepts the Geneva Conventions as applying to the occupied Palestinian territories?
We, of course, accept the Geneva Conventions. Go ahead.
Okay.
But he didn't answer it right there. That's the point that I see, right? Of course you accept Geneva Conventions. His question was whether you think they apply to the occupied territories. Which the point is, that's why he took it, because either way, you can't say I accept it, but not there. The point is it applies to any location. And the point is that the Geneva Conventions very clearly discuss occupied territories and the idea of what their legalities are. So that's an important point in all this.
I wasn't able to get that before. Thank you.
Because he wasn't. He was kind of waffling about it before. So it goes on to say, the next day, he raised his hand, the entire briefing, as he usually does, and he didn't call on him. I think you can almost just even see in that face, like he didn't like the way that ended up. Like, oops, maybe I wasn't supposed to say that. I mean, it's my personal opinion, but then he says, I went up to him after and asked him, why didn't he specify occupied Palestinian territory? And this is what he said.
No, just a follow-up on the, when you said yesterday that the Geneva Convention, that you recognized the Geneva Convention, you meant it with respect to the Israeli occupied territories.
I meant exactly what I said.
But you didn't say the occupied territories.
Exactly what I said.
So you don't recognize it with respect to
the briefing ended about 30 seconds.
But I didn't get called on again.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. I did it on purpose, right? Very clearly. Think about that. But you didn't call on me. I had my hand raised all the time. Yeah, I know. I was there. Like, it's just so, it's just crazy to again, those are the kind of people that, you want to see put in their place, right? A person who clearly feels powerful right there, but is the smallest person in the room. Now that you could take that as personal. I'm really not making, I hate that person. I think he's disgusting, but I'm talking from a political sense. Like, you can very clearly sense this person is just wielding, perceived power over Sam because he doesn't like that he's asking questions that make Matt Miller feel stupid because he knows he has to lie about them. That's all my take on it. But it's crazy. And he goes on to say, when asked if he doesn't recognize Geneva Conventions, basically clearly says, I'm not going to call on you. And in November, he asked his deputy, Patel was his name, about the Geneva Conventions, and he was evasive. When he pushed for an answer, he threatened to kick him out of the building. This is the reality of where we're at with all this. I mean, and the overall point, guys, is it's obvious that they are trying to create this kind of legal gray area around the legalities of this. And that's just simply what they do. They don't believe in these things. They think they're levers. They are tools to apply pressure when they want to. And they feel they've grown powerful enough, seemingly just like Israel, to just disregard them whenever they want. And seemingly they're right. But something has shifted today, and people are seeing it. Maybe we can change it. Now, this is an article from PBS from the 23rd of February. Biden administration restores U.S. policy calling Israeli settlements illegitimate. Just want to include that. Remember that? That was the shift from Pompeo saying that they were, like, I forget the word. It was like some ambiguous middle ground word that made it seem like it wasn't illegal, but didn't say that they were. It was typical BS politics. But the point was, they said, no, they are illegitimate, which doesn't even mean illegal. So it's kind of the same thing in the other way, but illegitimate. The settlements, all of them. Israeli settlements are illegitimate because the reality is all of those settlements are built on area that were supposed to be part of the Palestinian land for the two-state solution. Rather, the context of the ones that are is the main point. Then let's talk about this. We talked about this recently, February 1st. In historic move, Biden sanctions extremist Israeli settlers. Now, not because they're just illegal by nature, because what they are is occupying illegal territory, but because they were murdering and raping and stealing. And that was the real story. That was openly discussed, roundly. They maybe not list off rape in the headline here, but that was a huge part of it. That was openly discussed. That was reported by Israeli media. They were burning houses. They were burning fields. They were beating people in the streets. They were killing people in the streets. They were raping women. It was very public, and this is why it got to this point. Sanctioning the extremist Israeli settlers. And then, of course, he walked it back because obviously, this is what point what happened. I'm like, oh, I'm surprised that happened. And then, of course, now I'm not because it was never meant to be real. Thanks, shout out to Bread and Circus for highlighting this. Joe Biden walked back the sanctions he allegedly put on Israeli settlers. Here is Times of Israel. U.S. says Israeli banks don't really have to close the accounts. It's not that big a deal. That's really what happened. Letter clarifying policy comes after several banks denied those sanctioned access to their assets. You know, like they've done to Russia and China and everybody else, and then never rolled it back. But it said infuriating the treasury chief in Israel, who threatened to take revenge on the Palestinian Authority because that's illegal. No, but just because they're completely above the law in their mind, and we're going to threaten to do whatever we want. And then guess what? Biden gave in and gave them what they want. This is from JewishPress.com. Biden cries uncle as Smotrich wins war against sanctions on settlers. It just shows you that they have something, guys. They make a huge statement to make it look like they're on the right side of this, but we know they're not. And then they just go, hey, we can't access our bank accounts. Well, yeah, that's what the sanctions did. And they go, well, we're going to attack the PA. Okay. Take it back. How do you not read that for exactly what we're talking about? And just if we want to get more into international law, which I think is important, we just showed you this. Here's Muhammad Shihab pointing out Israeli soldiers openly taking Gazans as human shields, which is like I think the fourth or fifth example just since October 7th caught on video. These guys are literally handcuffed in front of a tank as they're going into an area where and this is an engaged area. It's called the neighbor procedure. And I played the clip right here. I'm going to skip it today for time, but the clip is right here. And the link to the show is right here. It's an open secret. The Guardian writes about it. The UN has written about it. Every human rights group in the world has written about it. They know it. They didn't stop it. It's human shield. It's a violation of the law. Nobody cares. They do it in plain view. So on the concept of international law, let's talk about the main point of the show that I wanted to get into for this topic, where this Arab convert to Judaism, or I guess specifically, I guess it would be, well, I guess I'd be assuming he was a Muslim, but it's an Arab person who wasn't a Jewish person who ended up converting to Judaism. And this is not a new story, in fact. I'll just start with this. Palestinian convert to Judaism freed from jail. Now it says his name is his convert name is David Ben Abraham. Now it says in 2019, December, he was arrested. Completely unrelated with the conversion or anything like that. Was arrested, just because he was Palestinian, probably. My personal opinion, but you guys can look into it. It says he was released from jail, was being held, and was beaten up while he was there. He spent 58 days in jail, finally being released. It doesn't really get into why, which I didn't really go too deep on this. I just want to talk about this was a secondary point. We're going to get into this discussion. This is an older one. It said, right here, it says he'd been arrested in October by armed men while visiting his son in the West Bank. Do you think that's about it? It's because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and those people are unaccountable. Like that, we keep proving to you. And they arrested him. No, it doesn't seem like they charged him with anything. They put him in jail. And he was there for quite a while. That's a common reality for people in the unaccountable authoritarian state of Zionist Israel. By the way, for Jews also, that we're proving to you right now. But it's Arab Jews, it's Ethiopian Jews, it's in fact Orthodox Jews, if they just dare to call out Israel and Zionism. So clearly, it's not about Jews at all. It's about Zionism. And that is the point we keep making. But it says they handcuffed me and took me to jail. I took a lot of beatings there. Now, this argument, the way they're framing this, is very clearly meant to kind of insinuate that, see, it's the bad Palestinians that hurt him in jail. But do you know why it happened? Because the guards went out of their way to tell everybody that he converted to Judaism. Now, you can again argue that that's gross that those people would beat up on him just because he converted to Judaism, and I would agree with that. But the point is, you're in a prison. Like, you realize that, let's just say you went into a U.S. prison, and all the guards was like, this guy raped kids. Not to say that there's any connection between those things. What I'm saying is, it's something that you know is going to get the prison people. The reason I said that is because it's a pretty famous reality that pedophiles don't fare too well in prisons. They get the worst treatment by guards and prisoners alike, which, quite frankly, good. But I think it's, even though it's technically against the law, my point is that if they did that and then they beat him up, I guess you'd even use a better example, like something that's not like something we would all clearly hate. The point's nonetheless the same, is that you're doing that to get him beat up. Now, yes, that is something that still it still shows you that those prisoners are willing to hurt somebody based on, whatever. Again, the Palestine's a bad example because as I say that, I'm like, no one's going to be mad about that. I'm trying to think of another overlap, right? Just the point is that the guards can hate this person because he became a Jew, but it's a prison. And these people these are bad people in prison, or I guess, again, that's the assumption in Israeli prisons. God only knows. I'm watering this in the wrong ways. The point is simple. They did it because they knew he would get hurt. And yes, that can influence the way you see these people in prison. But as it goes forward, it says, the meager food he was given, quote, wouldn't satisfy a mouse. So is that the prisoners because he was Jewish? No, that's the other Jewish guards because he's an Arab. I was denied water. I fainted 3 times and took me to the hospital. Why? Because he was in the West Bank visiting his son. That's it. They put him in jail. They got him beat up. They didn't feed him. They didn't give him water. But this is Tuesday in Israel, guys, for an Arab person. It says he was later, this is on the Jerusalem Post. It says he was later held in solitary confinement, he said, where clerics tried to persuade him to return to Islam. Which, again, you can be upset about. I don't know why you would. That happens all over the world in all sorts of religions. But the bottom line is, the bottom line was that he got beat up in this prison because he converted to Judaism, not because they beat him up just because it happened, because the prison guards made that the reality. So do they respect people just because they're Jews? No, they hate people just because they're different. And that is the reality of any kind of genuine racism. So the point here is going forward to today. Which I only wanted to show you that to make you realize this is not some random new thing. It only happened because of October 7th. They hated him back then. Disturbing video shows Jewish convert fatally shot by the IDF in the West Bank who posed no threat. So it's the same thing. And here's the crazy part. Even after he went to prison for a short period of time where they beat him up and starved him and denied him water until he passed out, he still went back through these checkpoints, probably because he wants to see his son. Think about living like that, knowing that at any moment, for no reason, they could just kill you or put you in prison for no reason for weeks. That's the reality for Palestinians, guys, and nobody wants to talk about it because people are too cowardly to admit it. But the video, we'll just go right to the video and show you this because it's really obvious. Now, this is in response to this, which we'll make a point about next, Aviva Klampa saying, Gaza terrorists rampaged across southern Israel, murdering, raping, torturing. It's the same old atrocity propaganda that nobody can really prove. That's all they have. But this is somebody that Furkan Guzkura shared. Now, I had heard this discussed, but I hadn't seen this video yet. Now, those of you that might have shared it with me, I might have missed it. I miss a lot, actually, because so much is sent to me these days. But this is hard to watch. It's very clear. Now, a lot of it's I believe it's in Hebrew, but there's the subtitles, and the video is transparently obvious. So basically, first of all, for the setup, he's at the checkpoint, which, by the way, I don't know why these people are forced to go through checkpoints in the West Bank anyway. This isn't Gaza. It's not Hamas. The Hamas is in Gaza. The bottom line is because Palestinian. That's it. Now, he says, hands up now. Has a gun pointed at him already. The guy's just standing there. Now, despite the fact that the image makes it look as if he's hiding something, the guy's just standing there, and you'll see as it goes forward. He said, this is somebody talking in the background, saying, this is how it looked less than a fortnight ago at this junction. Saying David, an Arab who converted to Judaism, aroused the suspicions of reservists in the area, which usually are settlers and other extremists, in my opinion. Now, to be clear, most everybody has to go through the IDF. My point is, though, that the people that are continuing in the, like a lot of them could ultimately be average people that go through it, which is why I always point out, not every IDF, not every Israeli, not every Jew. That's broad stroking is dumb. It's ignorant. We shouldn't do it. But obviously, I have continued to point out that a very large portion of the population does have these opinions because of the way they've influenced their population. It's the Zionist government fault. My point, though, is that they're clearly of that mind that this person is a threat, even though he's he's not really posing a threat, and he's telling you that he's a Jew. He says, because in this too, I will weave you. You understand me? I think that means hurt, kill, like the translation issue. And for what reason, right? But it says from here, in the next few seconds, we'll bring you to the exclusive footage of a conversation developing between him and the reservist. Now, you can see he's on the truck pass real quick. So right there, what you're seeing is him essentially be searched and investigated. It's at the end of which B shoots David twice towards the lower part of his body, I guess, and he died. Now, it says, are you Jewish? Now, to be clear, I didn't add that on the image I took. That's what this guy asked him. So I think that's a really important point. What does that have to do with anything in this context, or any context for that matter? Aren't we the ones told by every single Israeli representative or people that are screaming and shilling for Israel on the line that everybody has equal rights in Israel? Well, explain that for me. Why does it matter whether he's Jewish then? Wouldn't it be, are you Palestinian or Israeli? Or why does your religion matter in this context? Because, as always, guys, the point is, as Netanyahu would scream, it has in the past, it is for a state for the Jews alone. That's the point. And that's not an opinion, right? If you haven't seen that, and this is an important one for those that are just newly seeing this conversation, in 2019, a TV broadcaster made this argument that said everyone's equal in Israel, which is the same thing everyone's screaming about on Twitter right now. Netanyahu came out and said publicly, quote, Israel is the nation state of the Jews alone. He said it in response to that person. Netanyahu responds to a TV star who said Arabs are equal citizens. And again, that's even what Avi Shalom talks about in regard to the fact that they passed this law. And we know that. It makes the point is, because of that, it makes them provably racist.
Zionism is racism. Israel cannot be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for everybody. And that's what I would like Israel to be. I'd like a democratic solution, one state with equal rights for all its inhabitants. Your organization, Human Rights Watch, issued a report last year about Israel, and the conclusion was it is an apartheid state. And there are 4 major human rights groups in the last 2 years who issued similar reports, reached the same conclusion. Israel is an apartheid state. So apartheid is racism. Apartheid is discrimination. But Israel is the only member of the United Nations that I know which is officially racist. And I say this because of the July 2018 nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. Unique means exclusive. Yes. It means Arabs have no right to self-determination. It means even if Arabs became a majority, they would still have no right to self-determination. So most certainly Zionism is a racist ideology, and it is largely responsible for the Nakba, that has unfolded throughout the last century and continues today.
And he's a very well respected British Israeli historian, but I'm sure they hate him too because he calls out the reality. But you know, you just can't contrast these kind of statements with the idea that somehow everyone's equal. That they're counterintuitive. So the point again. Oh, actually, before we finish, let's go back to that video. I want you to see the rest of that. So he says, "Are you Jewish?" So the point was right there, the idea that it somehow matters whether you're Jewish. But he goes, "Yes, I am Jewish." He goes, "What's your Jewish name?" And I think I think he's pointing to his bag, saying, "Look, I've got my stuff's right there," which indicates to me he likely does not have a weapon in that bag, which ultimately became the argument. And I don't know how many times in the past I've seen the claim that a kid had a knife or a gun that later turned out to be false. We just saw one where Hananya Naftali faked a bicycle into a grenade launcher, and that got exposed even by the IDF. And they said, "We apologize. It was actually a bike." Too late. Those kids are dead already. My point is, he points to the bag. He says, "What's your name?" Shouts over him, trying to point to it. He says, David Ben Abraham, you idiot. Ben Abraham is lovely. I'm not sure whether that was him saying, I think what it was is the IDF member saying, like, Ben Abraham, you idiot. Ben Abraham is lovely, like the name from somebody else. You shouldn't have it. I'm not sure. Either way, it says, "Please, because in this too I will weave you. Do you understand me?" So that clearly means hurt, kill, the way his body language. He jams the gun at him. For what? Hands up now. It says, "What do you want?" "I want you to shut up and not move." It says, "Please go back over there." Now he says, this is weird. Now, I mean, if you read this, I thought that earlier I was reading this and I was kind of like, well, who said that? But now that you think about it, he says, "Please go back over there," and yells Jew. I think it's almost as if he's either claiming he doesn't believe him, or even worse, that he knows he's Jewish and just doesn't care because he's Palestinian, which is a Zionist thing, guys. That's the point. So watch it again. But it seems like he was talking, so it's hard to tell. This is the real point, though. So you see right here on the left, you see the guy standing there right where he was. You'll see his hands in the air, and you see him get shot. Now it says, "This is how the tragic incident ended. After another reservist updates B," which of course, I guess we just don't get to find out who these people are anymore. Even the videos they put out are all blurring their faces. I think they know that they're being cataloged. But he says that they said they found the knife in his bag. How would we ever find out? And even then, is it against the law? I mean, the guy's not living in Gaza. Like, the point is, this is a guy who's converted to Judaism, who's a known member of society, and they claim he found a knife. That's the point. After this happens, though, he decides to open fire on him afterward. Now, watch this. Let's just even pretend there was a knife in that bag. What is the argument here? The argument is that the argument would be that you have two people over here looking at the bag, and you got one guy standing over there by himself with his hands in the air. They find a knife and they go, "Shoot him." And they shoot him. Not a threat because they found a knife in a bag when they're standing 5-10 feet away from him. Like, what else do you read that as? It's just disregard, knowing that you will never be held accountable for that. Just kill the guy. According to him, he lowered his hands, which he was told to keep up. That's what they claimed. But then what does the bag have to do with it? If he lowered his hands, watch. Which is not true, though. You can see his hands up. Saying his hands were raised, suspecting that he was going for, they suspected he was going for the knife, even though his hands were up. See? Right there. Watch. They shot him, guys. There's no way around that. Zoom in all you want. His hands are straight up, and they shoot him dead. Hands up. First shot, right there. Shot him right in the chest. Makes me so angry. It says David Ben Abraham of blessed memory was 63 years old at his death. Born with the name Semach Zaiton In 2019, he was disabled by PA officials, which again, that's what they're saying. I don't know if that's accurate or not. But again, the point being that PA officials are not Gaza. As I might, well, I'm not going to get into tonight for time, but that Robert, we will go over, has an excellent article, don't miss it, in regard to the Palestinian Authority. It's on Substack right now. But the point was that they're not on the side of the Palestinians, guys, right? For sure, right now. Tried to force him to return. Now, see, they're basically saying trying to force him to become a Muslim again. The point is, even if you want to say that's all true, it doesn't change the fact that they just shot an unarmed man with his arms in the air, even though they knew that he was a Jewish person, which again shouldn't really matter. He's a human being. So this response was to this person saying, Gaza terrorists rampaged across southern Israel, murdering, raping, and torturing civilians. Don't forget, for 1 minute, who started this war. Which again, that's the argument. Well, that started 75 years ago, in fact. And even before October 7th, you could show that Israel was literally, like, again, the point simply about showing things like this. Hold on. And this is from the UNICEF, from the United Nations, October 6th. Human rights group says 2023 was the deadliest year for Palestinian children. Explain how that starts on October 7th when it was already the most deadly year in history for Palestinian children. This actually is actually, I'm glad I brought this up. This will be a good point to point back to when we get to some of these next clips, where they say that it's blood libel to claim this is a war on children. Now, for Khan writes, in regard to showing this video, in regard to that statement, never forget Israel raping, torturing, and killing 50,000 civilians for the last 25 weeks. 100,000 plus civilians are injured. 2 million are displaced and in famine. I don't think 2 million are experiencing famine at the moment, but ultimately all starving, most certainly, as far as we can prove. Now, talking about this claim, somebody made a good point here, actually, just before we go into more of this, which I find interesting. It could just be a photographic thing, but I thought it was interesting, pointing out that these are one of these few images we have of stuff like this. But if you look, it does show an interesting thing on her leg right there, which could be indicative of like Photoshop, but maybe not. I just want to point that out because they saw it here and highlighted it. I thought, yeah, it doesn't look interesting. Not to say that changes anything about their lies and conversations, but it would be another interesting point about whether they altered certain things. But that wasn't the real point. The point is the claiming the raping and torturing, even the murdering, quite frankly, at this point, we should be wondering who and where and how many. Because the IDF has provably, I mean, even there's a new one even coming out right now where apparently another military leader has admitted that they were committing, dang it. Hold on. Figured since I didn't want to make a whole point about this just because, obviously already we're taking longer than I wanted. But since I'm saying this is a perfect point to include this, just one of them anyway, here is both the cradle. Here, I'll grab this one from Mondoweiss. Basically, this is an addition to everything we've already discussed. And I will include this in the show notes. Son of a gun. Sorry. 1 second. The old going for paste and hit copy instead. I'm sure we all know that. All right. So Mondoweiss, Captain Barr, this is from March 27th this year. Captain Barr Zonsheen recounts firing tank shells on vehicles carrying Israeli civilians on October 7th. He says, quote, I decided that this is the right decision, that it's better to stop the abduction and that they not be taken. That is one of the most explicitly exact. You killed them knowing they were there because they didn't want them to get taken. Whatever your feeling on that was, that is the Hannibal directive. Kill them so they can't be taken. What do the families think about that? Right? I mean, it's this Hannibal directive, guys. It's undeniable. Include that for you. So the point is, she's including these kind of arguments because that's the atrocity propaganda. And we don't know how many were killed. We know that some were killed, some were taken, but to what degree? You can't keep claiming all these broad, especially the idea of raping, because that is being continually shown to not have evidence behind it, or fact, or proof, excuse me. Now, on that note, Robert wrote this article on the 29th. Israel's October 7th rape propaganda has encouraged sexual violence against Palestinian women. Now, even if you want to argue that there's some mass systemic rape plan, even though that has not been proven, now that's not to ignore the allegations from the recent New York Post, not the one where they got caught lying about everything, which should matter to you, but the last one that came out where the woman, apparently a public woman now, came out and said, I was abused while I was in Gaza. Not October 7th, but when they were in Gaza. And you read the article, there's not one single mention of rape anywhere in the article, but clearly they're highlighting what they argue is sexual abuse. Either way, after everything we've seen, the same point that I see honest, I would say objective people making is she could be telling the truth. We don't know. It certainly could be true. With all of the lies we've gotten so far, with all of the aggressive, the provable examples of where they've gotten people to say things that we know aren't true, or people that have made entire narratives around this that we can later prove to you are not just manufactured, but they must have been involved in. The point is now we go, well, how do we take that at face value? So my point is simple, that we should consider it, but unless there's something other than statements, what are we left to do? There's no forensic evidence. So we have, even in Israel law, you can't ever have any legal accountability. And yet they're still trying to use that to push people in the UN to make statements, while we have real evidence, not only evidence, but personal testimony, people, witnesses, the stuff they don't have in this conversation, other than lies we've proven to be lies, understand, that the UN has highlighted about Palestine. Just October 7th forward, but well before it too. And this is one of the things I think is important to consider, that regardless of the veracity of these claims, the simple allegation of it with no evidence has led to people believing it and carrying out acts of their own against Palestinians. It says, on top of the prevailing apathy over the rape and sexual abuse of Palestinian women in Gaza, perhaps the most disturbing part of all of this is that the October 7th propaganda has undoubtedly led to a kind of revenge sexual violence against Palestinian women. One case to consider is the testimony of a 47-year-old Lama al-Fakouri, who was imprisoned by Israel forces and said, quote, an interrogator came in and asked me in English what I thought about what Hamas did. He swore at me and called me a whore. This is a woman. He said there were 20 soldiers in that room and that they would rape me like ISIS raped Jewish women in Israel, which still to this point, there's no proof of. He kept swearing at me and threatening me and my family. Then a female soldier came and took me to another room with the more female soldiers who told me, welcome to hell. They sat me in a chair and started laughing at me and calling me whore again and again, which may seem small in comparison to allegations of rape and so on, but it gets much worse. And there are very provable cases of rape and sexual abuse, torture. But the point is just highlighting that in the most, this isn't a Hamas member. This is a 47-year-old woman who was later released, who's not Hamas, who they treated like a piece of garbage because they were angry. Doesn't change the fact that they're violating the law. Now it says the above mentioned testimony was collected by Israel's leading human rights group, B'Tselem, which if you'd like to, you can read about here. It should matter to you that it's both Palestinian and Israeli human rights group that are telling you what's going on that Israel's denying. Now, are we calling B'Tselem an anti-Jewish, racist, anti-Semite platform? They haven't done it yet, but they probably will if they keep calling it out, which would be really stupid. But it says, what is consistent throughout the testimonies recorded from Palestinian women who were taken captive by the Israeli army is that they were threatened and beaten after Israeli forces specifically brought up the allegations of Jewish women being raped on October 7th by Hamas. In early December, a Palestinian woman who was released from the Israeli military detention during a Hamas-Israel prisoner exchange told the media that the women in the Israeli prisons were being raped. It is clear, when looking at the sheer scale of sexual humiliation, which has included repeatedly forcing Palestinian women to strip naked and display their bodies in front of soldiers, which is far more serious to them than it is for most Western women, not in the sense that like being fully naked, but like just dressing down to your underwear and so on. Like I would argue that's far more serious to them because of their personal beliefs than it is for a good portion of Western people. You can disagree, but I think that's pretty clear. And it says, has been perpetuated as a tactic of revenge in many cases. On top, and my point was that's why they do this, to intentionally humiliate and abuse them. This is on top of all this, we have literally hundreds of, this is the obviously most important part, that they've done it, they've produced their own evidence of it. They've literally done hundreds of snuff videos filmed by the soldiers themselves, often posted on their own Telegram and Instagram channels, many of which feature the soldiers wearing their lingerie or making fun of the women's clothing and degrading them as whores. None of this by accident. And while there are certainly cases of sexual violence in almost every war, the sheer scale of cases for which we have video, photographic evidence and testimony is truly astonishing, and certainly on a grander scale than we've seen during any period of Palestine-Israel conflict. Now, just the examples of lingerie are the smaller things. We have snuff videos of them murdering, destroying, rolling over bodies, laughing and torturing people. We've seen there's the image of the person. I mean, we've seen all of it. I don't need to sell you guys on this. It's been over and over shown, and this is what was produced at the ICJ. That's why the intent is clear. It says the extremely vivid and gruesome stories spread about alleged rape on October 7th, most of which have been proven false, served as an effective tool to convince Western audiences of Israel's, quote, right to attack Gaza in the genocidal way that it is currently. As the evidence mounts, the suggestions that these rape lies have directly influenced Israeli soldiers to commit their own acts of rape and sexual violence against Palestinian women, it is clear why spreading such morbid stories, while either not bothering to confirm the veracity or willingly lying about them, is so incredibly dangerous, especially with the charge of rape. Of course, speaking about the Israeli government, all of the corporate media, the U.S. government, it says every single politician and journalist that has been responsible for spreading the October 7 mass rape atrocities, or 40 beheaded babies, or babies on a clothesline, or a woman's stomach cut open, or put in an oven, or 67 sperms, one woman, all that we can prove and they've admitted are lies now, and pushing blatantly false stories for specific purposes of aiding Israel's public relations. They are potentially complicit in rape and sexual violence themselves, personally. Now, I hope that reaches somebody who may not be truly lost in all this and just goes, whoa, maybe I am perpetuating rape. And that maybe sits with somebody. The bottom line is to float allegations that we don't know to be true is far more serious than waiting for more evidence. Or rather specifically, waiting for proof in any serious conversation. Now, think of how interesting it is to argue that it's more dangerous to not blindly believe a group and caught lying repeatedly than to wait to prove something. Like, where does that ever possibly make sense? Where are the journalists that are actually trying to argue that's the way we should be? No, you're not supposed to wait for proof. Take their word for it. Be a journalist. It's like, what? Maybe Ben Shapiro agrees. Bottom line, this is the kind of stuff we keep seeing. APAC put this out, the totally American group. It's been 24 hours since this video surfaced. This was posted on the 29th. Inexplicable silence from the Ceasefire Now squad, which as if everybody in the world calling for ceasefire now all has the same opinion. There are Israeli Jews calling for ceasefire now. You're a ridiculous entity. But the point is, this was the person who was tortured in custody until he said what he was supposed to say. And everybody's already spoken out about this. And that's why barely anybody made a point about this. Not the UN, not even the United States, because they've already been burned with this. And we've made this point over and over because they came out early on this. Remember, they had 3 or 4 people they had in the same white clothing. One of them was trembling. And what did they say? 40 beheaded babies who burned the children, who raped all the women. And then none of it was verified. Most of it was shown to be false. And then I think it was the LA Times and a couple of others, they even had to retract their stories, which is pretty rare today for corporate media. And so the rest of them are going, well, that made us look really stupid. So now they don't just blindly buy Israeli lies or statements, which, by the way, should have always been of what a journalist should do. But on top of that, Israel's own physicians for human rights have dismissed interrogations, the videos of these as propaganda. Why? Because they include torture. Everybody knows that. The Shin Bet and the rest of them have admitted to doing that. It says this, quote, confession isn't new. And the bottom line is they've been doing this the entire time. Multiple examples of them doing this have been, and saying things have later come back to be false, and they just keep doing it. And all they're saying is they raped the people that we were, we rape people. And what did they say before? The same kind of things. Like the example I keep showing you about that child, by the way, who just basically breaks down and says, fine, whatever you say is true. And they go, oh, good, he's guilty. That's how this works. But in the interest of time, read the rest of it for you. He basically, this seems to suggest they mistranslated what he was saying. I mean, this is what they're usually caught for. This clumsy, blunt propaganda that people can call out. But you can read this for yourself. There's extreme torture in regard to the earlier testimonies that have already come out in Israeli media, which clearly calls into question whether these things are valid or not. And everybody's using it. Every Israel Katz, and it's the same thing you see in any of these people. Even Klampus, Hen Mazig, Elon David, they all share the thing of the day they're supposed to share in the same kind of way with the same kind of statement. Gee, I wonder if they're all being led somehow. But PVT points out everyone knows Israeli forces terrorize, torture, and threaten Palestinians. Now, these are just screenshots, but I've already shown you all these on the show more than once. Examples of how the Haaretz, Israel force use dubious ways to get confessions. Shin Bet breaks you. You'd be insane to give a false confession. These are all from Haaretz. This is the one we showed you just recently. Israel court says Shin Bet pressured man to give false testimony. This is what they do. It's a matter of policy. And that's why this stuff is being shown to be false and why nobody seems to care when they make these statements today. Overall, I'll include this again, the same thing I've shown you, proving that whether it's El-Qaim Levy, the leader of supposed commission investigating this, where they provably used an image we know is from 2022, lying about it, and they still do, or the UN investigation that later proved they said it wasn't even an investigation. We didn't even claim who was at fault. And if we want a real investigation, they have to use the UN. And they said, no, UN's not allowed to be involved. And yet they turned around and said, she proved everything. She said live in the interview that they actually debunked 2 things that were being said. And one of them was what Zaka was saying. It's just that ridiculous. And so my point is, all of this is to claim or to show you that they're resting everything on these central claims that have been debunked from their own people in regard to Israeli corporate media. And they still just keep going. And this is about the point of the children. Here's a clip that simply says it's a war on children.
There are children everywhere, and this is without a doubt a war on children.
Now, of course, the reason they make it this 10-second clip, because what they're cutting out is the fact that they're not saying there's just lots of children everywhere. They're saying there are dead bodies of children everywhere. And there are children everywhere too, because it's half the entire population are under 18. But the point is clear, guys. Everybody knows that they're killing lots of people. Even IDF is basically saying, well, it's because they're using human shields. It's the same thing with the food aid we keep talking about. Oh, that's the wrong one. There it is. It's the same thing with the food aid we keep talking about. Like, okay, so is Hamas stealing it? And that's why there's famine? Or are you letting it all through and they are getting it and they're lying about famine? You can't make both those simultaneously, but they're doing that. Same point here. So you're telling us that children are dying because Hamas is holding them human shields, but then alternatively, you're coming out and saying it's blood libel because there's not a war on children or there's not children dying. It says there's a centuries-old tradition of falsely accusing Jews of being bloodthirsty murderers who kill non-Jewish children. Nobody said that. Nobody even brought the word Jew into this or Judaism. That's what you did. It says in order to encourage mob violence, because as I keep saying, that is the only thing that they have, Zionists. You hate Jewish people. You're racist. Well, no, we're pointing to dead children on the street, so you just go back to sleep, right? Like, it's nothing to do with that. We're talking about the objective reality of whoever's fighting and the byproduct of dead children. You're a racist. It doesn't make sense, does it? But we should laugh at people like this. And the point is, it's not up for debate. Oh, how did I miss that? Hold on. Right there. Do it. There you go. The one I've shown you before. The IDF, the army came out and said that the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers are, quote, reliable. Vice covered, the Israeli intelligence also came out and deemed those numbers generally accurate. They're the ones telling you 15,000 children have been killed. The Israeli intelligence have then said, yes, those are accurate. So is Hen here arguing that the military is lying? Or are you claiming, Hen Mazig, that you know better than the IDF? Oops. The point is they're all probably lying about something. That they just aren't lining up their propaganda. But same thing. Everybody everywhere came up with the same point. Same little clip, same file. Oh, this one's 5 seconds. That's funny. No, I guess it's the same clip. I thought it was longer, but the same short clip. It has the blood libel of 1,144 lives today. Oh, right, because you only care about one day that happened 6 months ago. That's it. And even that number I can prove to you is not accurate because half of them were IDF and soldiers and settlers and police. So that makes them military targets. So that makes the armed resistance aspect of that. Those are legal targets. But who cares about whatever we're talking about? Who cares about the 30,000 people over here? You're only allowed to care about one side of it. Blood libel. 880 years later on our national broadcaster. Like, okay, where are you getting this from? This is without a doubt a war on children. He says, you believe Hamas's bogus figures. No, you are denying that the IDF said they're accurate, but they know that. This is all about trying to cover this thing up. The bottom line is, how do you go from it's a war on children to being blood libel? Well, as I said, I don't get why a lot of you blind supporters of Israel are, oh, this was the wrong one, actually. Well, I think I've got it over here. See, I can just say it off the top of my head. The point is that without you say the war on children, where was it? Hold on, I just lost it. Well, in any case, the bottom line I'm trying to make here is that you can't just jump from a claim about children being killed in a war to being you're an anti-Semite Jew hater without anything in between, because it's stupid. And in fact, this is the point about how we keep telling you that Zionists are watering down what real racism looks like, to the point to where anti-Semitism means nothing, because it is real. People do hate people, Semites, that necessarily aren't what we call these European people that came to join the Zionist state of Israel. The point is that Palestinians are Semites, to be quite frank. Bottom line, there is racism against everybody. But to just think about how crazy it is to just kind of jam these things together, claim that she's somehow a racist anti-Semite because she points out that children are dead. And this is why people are being shaken from this, because it's so clumsy. Now, this is the same thing. BBC Easter message. This is without a doubt a war on children. Again, same point. That's it. Same 5-second clip. She says, this is without a doubt anti-Semitic blood libel. I mean, guys, these are, this is the founder of I'm not recognized this one, but these people were academics, politicians. It's so dumb that you have to realize these people are either not that bright or they're really, really disgustingly dishonest to the point to where they're gaslighting for the worst genocide we've ever seen. And says, I know it sounds mad to accuse the BBC of pushing anti-Semitic blood libel. It sounds mad because it's mad. Blood libel is respectable and normal again. My God. These are the kind of things that even other Jews are calling out right now and saying, you guys are ridiculous. You are making Jewish people unsafe. Same thing that Mr. Meek, little cowardly Lindsey Graham did. This is the weirdest video in the world that I showed you before. My point on this was simply that Netanyahu is just staring at him with this weird little tiny smile. Just like, I don't know. It seems like a hostage video. Now, I'm not going to get into it today, but you can just let it play for a second so you can see. Ugh, God, it creeps me out. Like, he's just like, yeah, tell him what I told you to say. The point is, Lindsey Graham is just completely towing whatever Israel told me to say. It's all lies, blood libel to say they're starving people, even though they're starving people, and we can all prove it. Blood libel. And don't forget, this very tweet from Lindsey Graham already had a fact check on it that said, blood libel is the myth the Jews sacrifice Christian kids to use blood at Passover, not everything Israel doesn't like. And then it goes on to say Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war and cites Human Rights Watch and Reuters. And then, of course, because Zionists seem to control Twitter, they removed that community note. But this is the point I made before. So that means you're telling us that it is everything Israel doesn't like, because if you're removing that, that means the opposite is true. On top of that, I didn't say this last time, but you're removing this, saying Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. And you're citing Reuters, a leading independent corporate platform in the world, and Human Rights Watch, a leading humanitarian group. Are you saying they're both lying? If so, where's your counter evidence? Isn't that how this is supposed to work? Oh, and they also show that he took $1 million from the Israel lobby. Oops. No, of course, they just delete that. That's not how this game is supposed to work. If you proved it wrong, you're supposed to put a note. The point is, guys, you have to be clear on this. That is a clear bias. Somebody in that Zionist side said, get rid of that, and it's gone. Because you just don't challenge those obvious things, because you can prove those things. On top of that, this is a post I made from February 9th. Remember this? WikiLeaks saying verified document from Israel saying that we're going to displace everybody to Egypt. And they did verify it. It is an Israeli document that was secretly. So it's obviously real. And we've proven that because they're doing that now. But check this out. I said this on February 9th. I said, remember when this, because they did say this, remember when we were told that this claim was an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory or blood libel just a few months ago? They did say that. How dare you? We're not going to do that. And then the plan comes out and they hide it. But here's what what Twitter did. Look, you're unable to view this post because the account owner limits who can see it. Well, that is almost always what is shown when somebody blocks you or something like that. It's right there. That's the post. Look. So why is that happening? Because you know why. Those aren't glitches, because it keeps happening very specifically in only one direction, hiding things that are showing the truth about Israel, or, overexposing things that are lies about Palestine. That is ridiculous. Just one more example of censorship. But then, of course, let's finish with a couple of points, since we're already going way longer than I want. Aviva Klampas, just continuing to show you this kind of conflation, this clumsy lie, basically, about the idea that these people are racist. It's the same kind of point we were just making about blood libel in general, right? That saying that they're starving people is blood libel. Why is that blood libel? Couldn't I just think that and be wrong? The only thing you have is to try to make it about racism, and that's it. And how do you know what I think about race? I mean, that's so dumb. At the bottom of the level, like, there's no due diligence, there's no evidence. You're broad stroking everybody even watching this by saying, if you think that, you're racist. Why don't we laugh at how dumb that is? Because these are the kind of groups from both sides that are maintaining the power structure, the status quo. I think we are laughing at this. These people are the ones trying to jam you back in with some kind of other lie. Here, she writes from this video where it's at a college where they're simply highlighting that there are students there, or rather other people, or it is students, who are calling them terrorists, posting things about them, saying they're terrorists. Why? Because they want to free Palestine, which is the truth about the movement, what they're fighting for. You can look at it. You can check out the information and even listen to what they're saying. But she says, and cites what they say, it's okay to be angry, but it's even more okay to turn that anger into action, into struggle. Well, yeah, first of all, again, armed struggle is legal under international law for an occupied territory, which they know, they just don't like you to know. But think of how funny it is that you can hear Rabbi Shmuley or some IDF member come up and say, that we're going to be the Jews that we look you in the eye and then shoot you in the face and take your head off. Or him saying, you're now time to be feared because we're going to come out and attack. They're literally saying that. And I don't believe every Jew in the world even thinks that. But they're saying that, and that's not over the top. But here's somebody saying it's okay to be angry, turn it into action, because you want to go wink, wink, they mean murder and rape and they hate Jews. That's ridiculous. Maybe they do. I don't believe they do based on everything they go on to say, and you couldn't know either. And quite frankly, I think it's obvious that the vast majority of these groups don't think that. And even if they did, they would not make it clear because that would hurt them in the long run. My point, though, is that they don't think this based on everything they've been fighting for, especially because you can keep showing the exact reverse in the way that most Israeli politicians are constantly screaming what they want to do. Explicit. Kill them all. Starve them. Human animals. But this matters, right? But let's listen to what she has to say, because she calls this incitement to violence. Again, the pro-murder, pro-rape, pro-abduction mob at Western University singles out names Jewish students. Is that what they did? Or did they highlight people who are promoting Israel and genocide? Only you are making this about Judaism. That's the point I was going to say before. I said they're calling, well, let's play it first.
You are next! Western University, record this on your notes. 3 names so far. First one that called me personally a terrorist sympathizer, Maya Wolfman.
Okay. He's calling out people who called him a terrorist sympathizer. That's very clear.
Shame! Shame! Joshua Sugar. Shame! Western University, we're not going anywhere. BDS has to exist.
I am enraged by the lack of response from people responsible in this country.
I realize how hilarious this is. This is their special cut, right? This is the edit that's meant to make it look serious and dangerous with the weird music. It's not at all. Everything they're saying is super peaceful activism, fighting for armed resistance, and again, supporting something that is legal in international law. Just because you're angry about it does not make that some kind of violent concept. It is a legal act of armed resistance. That's not to say that Hamas did not go on to commit crimes around that, because they clearly did. They clearly did take people that were crimes. Nobody honest is saying otherwise. That's what we keep pointing out about Francesca Albanese or Mal Gilbert. We just saw the same point. That's the same reality. That just because entities did commit crimes does not invalidate the international law that is always existing. If that's the case, then every war we've ever fought anywhere in the world should be invalidated. And maybe you can make that case, but if you're going to, you better make it broadly to all of them and not just the one war you don't like, right? Or rather the one concept that you disagree with. Because the point is, these people are not what she's claiming they are.
It's okay to be angry, but it's even more okay to turn that anger into action, into struggle for change. We stand for BDS. We stand for boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
Right. That is a political action because a response to the idea that they're terrorists. Okay, fine. Then we're going to boycott, divest, and sanction. No, that's terrorism. Well, there you go. So it doesn't matter what angle you go in. They tell you go through the legal process, and you do, and they call you terrorist. Well, you go through and you actually fight them legally with armed resistance, and you call it terrorist. What's the difference, right? The point is they don't want you pushing back. And even this, the peaceful action called from her side is pro-rape, pro-murder, pro-abduction.
This institution, we stand with you for divestment. We also stand against the false and misleading and misused so-called International Holocaust Remembrance Association, IHRA, working definition or non-working definition of anti-Semitism.
What Aldi said right there is the idea that their definition of anti-Semitism is, again, we all know that's abused. It's a blatantly misrepresented. I was just making that point. Same as the blood libel. They level this accusation at people like Roger Waters and people that are aggressive. It's very obvious they're the opposite direction, fighting against inequality. And just because you don't like that they said Israel's a problem, suddenly you're the biggest anti-Semite in the world, even though there are obviously racist people. In fact, most Zionists are the most anti-Semitic people I know.
We need to keep it off our campuses, keep it out of our classrooms, keep it out of our school boards, our municipalities, and every other institution.
I didn't realize we're at 3:30. Well, I blew that one for the time. So let's rattle this off here. So the point, as I said, they're calling out blind support for genocide, like you're doing, by the way. Those who called them terrorists for standing up for a free Palestine. And you only make this point by doubling down on the lie. Exactly, right? The point is, I'm agreeing with myself, that you're only clearly making the point about how they're standing up for themselves by doubling down and calling people saying that we're fighting and defending against people calling us names, calling them murder and pro-rape. And it's just it's clumsy. It doesn't even connect for people that are even on your side. And I said, all you have is atrocity propaganda. And again, I argue this is a good point to throw out there for people like this. Only racists and Zionists make this about Judaism. Because there are racists out there that are, like I was just talking to people that are it doesn't matter. People making statements that I would argue are specifically like only Jews are the bad thing in the world kind of statements that I think are dumb. I think that's obviously the overlap of Zionism is clear with Judaism. But that is a manipulation. It's not every Jew. In fact, there's huge groups around the world that push back. So we have to be honest about that. My point, though, is those people are the ones only making it about Judaism instead of Zionism, or both, and Zionists who are making this only about Judaism against people who are simply highlighting crimes of Israel. Only racists and Zionists are making this about Judaism. They don't seem to have a good response for that. And then also hashtag Zionism is anti-Semitism. It seems to confuse them. They don't know what to say. But here is a post from New York Post from today. Jewish freshman's face plastered on anti-Israel flyers at Rutgers in act of unabated anti-Semitism. It's the same thing. Now, could it be that they just hated this person because he was Jewish? Certainly could be. But you know what? They don't know that as much as I don't know that. The bottom line is this was somebody who was a clear representation against them in the idea of pro-Israel, pro-genocide, as they see it. Supporting what they're doing is clearly genocidal, in my opinion. And so they use this person's face, which you could disagree with that. You can call that a violation of his privacy. And they used his face on the poster for, basically fighting against this free Gaza, free Palestine, with that guy's face kind of in the background. Okay. So let me ask you this. If that was a Christian, would that be anti-Christian? Would it be racist if you put a Christian guy's face on there about stopping genocide? Well, clearly not. What about a Muslim? You get the point. How is it only racist when the guy just so happens to be Jewish? Because these people are highlighting somebody supporting Israel, which there's plenty of non-Jewish people supporting Israel that are being called out just the same. Is that racist? You'd probably say so. The point is, at the end of the day, it only is racist because they claim Judaism is involved, even though nobody in this exact action is making it about Judaism. So it's all tangential. It's all just making connections where they don't exist, and everybody is now seeing this. Here is the Jewish Chronicle saying, quote, even if there was a massacre of millions of Jews in Israel, the brainwashed people in the West would be okay with that. I mean, what a dumb statement. Like, it's just so overwhelming to think, now, yes, racists and Zionists probably are okay with that. The 99.9% of the rest of the world clearly are not. But all you can do is jam that down the throats of everybody who are disagreeing and want every violence to stop. They're calling for ceasefire. That's no violence. We want it all to stop. Not to say ceasefire so Hamas can get stronger and keep doing that again, which is what they're wink trying to make it about. It's clear that the ceasefire, at least the people calling for it, they want that to continue. That's it. That means even if you think they're wrong and that means they're naively allowing it to grow, they still don't secretly want them to be killed. They're calling for all of it to stop. It's just so clear. And here's what she says. There's one more aspect to this.
The truth of the matter is, even if there was a massacre of 1 million Jews in Israel, the brainwashed people in the West that have been taught to believe that the Jews, for example, are colonizer in their indigenous land.
Oh, yeah, that little pesky little fact that we can all prove. And of course, all of the West, you're all dumb and racist because we say so. Like, think of the hubris. But the bottom line is, it's colonial settlerism. That's what the Zionist project is publicly, provably about. What do you call, whether God gave it to you or not, occupying territory where other people are? Same as the Native Americans in the United States. It is exactly what they are. And again, their own documentation they proudly represent that. So do you think she just doesn't know that? Is she just not care? You can decide for yourself. But this is the kind of ignorance, willful or otherwise, that we're constantly dealing with. And then it becomes you're racist and you hate Jewish people because you're acknowledging that fact.
Right? Would not bat an eyelash, and they would be okay with that. And that is something that we need to, as a community, understand that this is the new reality that we're at. It's not that the reality is new, is that the people are...
You just said the new reality we're at, but not that it's new.
Aware of it now. And do whatever it is that we can to fight it.
So yeah, oops, I almost made it sound like we haven't always been a threat. We haven't always been the victim. So wait, no, I didn't mean new. I just meant that we see it more now. Right, because the reality of Zionism is hinged on the idea that you're always the victim because you're Jews. And the point is, you're using Judaism as some kind of barrier between these people, that you're making the problem to justify your very creation, your very existence. This is not just my opinion. There's Orthodox Jewish groups around the world screaming about this, trying to get your attention. And quite frankly, it's a factual, obvious, provable reality that we've covered multiple times. But yet, we'll still be called racist, even though actively fighting for the safety of Jewish people, for Christians, for Muslims alike, in everything that we do, because we fight for people. Good people, honest people with integrity, objectivity, who care about human life. I don't care what your religion or what color you are. The point is, they do. Evidenced by basically everything we talked about today. Elon Levy says, if the response to Hamas burning whole families alive, which has been proven repeatedly to be false, is to recognize a Palestinian state, which, by the way, was the whole point, was that's what you have been claiming you've wanted all along. But even though we now know that's not true because it's been proven that Netanyahu has been funding them. Actually, I'll play that clip next. So all it proves is you never wanted it. And we now know that. But here he is coming out at a time when that's now pretty public knowledge. Deciding yesterday, after being fired for lying, to push something that most everyone knows is a lie, burned whole families alive. Even the IDF has admitted that's not true. And then to recognize a Palestinian state, knowing that it's on the record now that they funded Hamas to stop that. Is that desperate? Is that stupid? You just have for yourself. It says, what will be the response to the next round of Hamas atrocities, assuming that happens, when the Palestinians are told that sadistic barbarism like 10-7 advances their cause, assuming that even is what's going on. Think about that. It's just this broad, leaping, grasping argument about something that hasn't happened yet. My point was, well, ask Zionist leaders, since that is exactly their history, being rewarded for terrorism. Whether we're talking about bombing British troops and being rewarded with the Balfour Declaration, or bombing other Jews around the world in order to manipulate them into the state of Israel, you are a state founded on terrorism. That's not my opinion. It is documented by the United Nations. It's documented by human rights groups. It's documented by Zionists. But of course, you say racism and everyone runs away and doesn't talk about it. Well, here's my show about this, Zionism versus Nazism. We've also interviewed Zachary Foster, who has a PhD from Princeton in the history of Palestine and all things Palestine. And he's very open to, he speaks openly about this. The reality of the history of Palestine and Zionism and how it relates to Nazism. I mean, it's overwhelming. And it doesn't relate. If you haven't seen it, you need to watch the show to understand that's obvious. Zionism aligned itself with Nazism more than once, well past the final solution. I'll just grab that since I made the point. And this is just something to go on. This is the Haaretz article, which I think is why this is important, where he's highlighting that the Lehigh Party, which is a foundational aspect of Zionism, was openly trying to align itself with Nazi Germany. You can look it up on Wikipedia for crying out loud. The point is they continue to do so after what they claim was the reason for their existence. So how do you work with Nazi Germany during all of those atrocities and then later pretend the reason you need to exist is because of all those atrocities? That's why you need to understand the reality, because it seems confusing until you actually research and understand what's going on. Now, lastly, I'll just include this and we'll end here. Tiberius points this account, Kid Gutty, is suspended. No censorship on Twitter, right? Just after writing a thread on Israel's involvement on conflicts in the world. And guys, I challenge you to read this. It's well done. And it's a pretty objective, let's just breakdown of what they've been involved in. You can look up on Wikipedia. The Rwanda genocide, apartheid South Africa, the Mayan genocide. I mean, these are provable realities, guys. Right here in Sudan, the rapid support forces, we're just talking about that. This is the reality of what Israel's behind. Same with the U.S. government. It's not just unique to Israel, but she gets censored. The platform censorship is getting worse than Facebook. That's what he says. I agree. It's crazy. Every time I look at this, it shows that I'm not following these people. It's so funny to me. Anyway, as she wrote, Israel's involved in oppression all over the world, a threat of all things Israel has a hand in. And if you look, oh, that's right. It's gone. Anyway, the bottom line is, guys, this information is easily verifiable, and she got censored for pointing it out. I mean, what better point to end on to realize where we really are in this conversation? Like how self-evident the whole thing is. That these are censorship tactics, hiding verifiable facts, whether it's about Nazism and Zionism, whether about the origins of Palestine, whether it's about what Israel as a government has been involved in. I mean, it's just so transparent, and they're desperately trying to sweep this stuff under the rug. Matt Miller constantly gassing. I knew that was going to happen. That's so funny. I can't believe we went this long. I said that knowing I'm going to be done well before that timer goes off. And then I knew it. I set myself up for failure. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff we talked about today that I thought was important. And as always, I find a reason to just kind of relax and let it go longer, which some of you love, but some of you want me to kind of wrap it tighter. And I understand why, but it's good. I do both. In any case, I think it was important to cover all this and just to see how, my question, I guess, ultimately comes back to where's the breaking point? How many of us, if not all of us, every single human other than government, how many does it take to see this before something changes? Maybe there is no number. Maybe we need more than just seeing it, right? Which I believe. And I don't mean violence, but I believe that we need to start. What else is needed here? Petitioning governments, right? I mean, I rarely think that has a difference, or protesting, same thing, but I support action. I will support those, even though I don't really feel like it has much effect these days based on the way they see you. But we need something, right? So send me an email. Let's talk about it, right? Reach out or talk about it on Twitter or other non-censoring platforms. Just get this going in conversation about what we need to be doing. What are we doing wrong, right? It's just, I've never seen this much awareness from non-partisan conversation, and it doesn't seem to be even slowing down. In fact, it feels like the Rafah discussion is just about to happen. Maybe there is nothing. Maybe this is just the playing out of something that was designed to happen, and after this is when change might be possible. I refuse to accept that. How is it possible that we're unable to stop what we're watching play out when everybody sees it? Other governments are calling it out. The world court is saying it's happening. Human rights groups are all screaming about it. They're literally on the ground going, look at all the aid trucks they're not letting through. And day by day, it keeps going. Is it really that just Matt Millers of the world just go fake or wrong and just keeps happening? I refuse to accept that reality. So help me change it. Help me change what obviously needs to be changed. Thank you for tuning in today, guys. Help spread the information. Clip this up, share it out, tag me in it. I'll retweet it. Let's get it out as best as possible. We just put out a good article on Substack today that we touched on. Another article we didn't get to today that was on the website. And that was the one I'm talking about from the Palestinian Authority. So check out the Substack, more going on there. And I keep saying this, but I promise I'm going to get back to the monthly founders meetings and probably find out some other rewards here to generate more people joining. And make sure if you want to support the Give, Send, Go, the links are down below. I include it in the beginning. And any other ways you want to support us, we definitely need your help. But thank you for being here and continue to just be objective, for having compassion, which is sorely needed today. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, is on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Netanyahu